Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, his hair is winter dirt. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Some poems just hit different than others, I guess.
January sewer mud.
January mud, winter dirt.
What do you want me to do, man? I didn't make your hair color the way it is.
Never have I wished to have red hair more than I do right now, I guess. This is a true statement.
This week on the show, our 19-part coverage of Stephen King's It continues with part 3 covering chapters 4 and 5 of the novel. We begin part 2, June of 1958, as we head back in time to meet some of our characters in the summer after 5th grade. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I love it. I love the kid stuff with Stephen King as always. And here we just get some of the best maybe ever. I knew this book was going to be great. I kind of knew we were going to do this, but now that we're here, now that we're back in the past with the kid versions of these characters, I'm totally down for this. I am so excited. I am excited about today's conversation. I'm excited about this book. Everything is good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I've been looking forward to this all week. I want to say this, and I want to be careful to check my words here. Like, I have loved the last 2 weeks talking about this book with you. Loved. Like, it's been fantastic. It's been everything I hoped it could be. It kind of cemented this idea that's been in my head since I was much, much younger that this book is incredible. But it wasn't until this week, and it wasn't until starting this first chapter that we're going to cover today. And going back in time and seeing young Ben Hanscom, it wasn't until that moment that I was really, really like, there it is. There it is. The book that I proudly call one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book ever. There's just something about, like, the first chapter, great. Second chapter, great. The third chapter, masterclass in character introduction. We spend 80 pages introducing us to these 6 important characters. And yet, here in this moment, we begin part 2. It's like the first time I was like, oh, here it is, man. And it felt so good. I loved these chapters. I really, really did.
Yeah. I guess the one thing that stands out first and foremost is that we've got 2 characters who have they feel very different. They have very different voices, they just feel like very distinct characters. And I love both of them. Like, we do that Stephen King thing where in a very short span of pages, he makes you empathize with their plight, love them, care about their concerns, puts them in situations where you're like, oh my God, I'm so invested in this thing that is happening now that I can't believe it, and we'll talk about all that as we go, obviously, but just great stuff.
No, I love that. So let's waste no further time and get right into it. But before we do that, let's waste a little bit of further time. I have made that joke literally 100 times on this podcast. Like, literally, Matt, 100, and I'm not going to stop.
Funny. Yeah,
I'm not going to stop. We do have a couple quick announcements. The first one, you folks probably already know about, our Other Levels of the Tower episode covering the 2023 Children of the Corn episode is live now for you folks. If you're on our Patreon, you should go over and check that out. That was quite a conversation, Matt. We recorded that one last night, and I had a lot of fun recording the episode. Did not have a lot of fun watching the movie.
Yeah. If I were to recommend one of the 2, I would recommend you just listen to us talk about it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't always say that. I think it's important to experiencing the media when you're listening to people critique it. I do think that's important. But in this case, absolutely, 100%. Don't watch the movie. Just listen to us talk about it for an hour, and you'll be good. You'll be set.
Yep,
you'll be better for it.
Deserves to be buried with some kind of backhoe in a cornfield.
The only other quick announcement I had, and I'm making this early for a very important reason. We have yesterday announced what our book club for the month of July is going to be. For those that don't know, we do a monthly book club over on our YouTube account where the last Friday of the month, or sometimes the first Friday of the next month, we get together live and chat about a book chosen by our patrons. This month, our patrons have chosen the book The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. And this is why I'm telling you folks about this now. This is a very long book. This is like comparable to it in length. And we've got 4 weeks to read it. So we want to let you folks know about it now, because if you want to participate in that, start reading now. That's definitely what we're doing. So it's I think it's gonna be fun. This is embarrassingly a book that I never finished myself, and so I now have a reason, and I have to do it.
Yeah, it's almost 53 hours in the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think maybe the longest or second longest maybe book club book that we've read. This is none of this is to discourage anyone. It's just art now. You can
we
make it
just
though.
we just want to get it across to people that if they want to participate in that, they really should start right away for
Yeah,
sure.
yep.
And also myself, because I haven't started the book yet. I really need to start that. So that it's going to be on the 4th of August, that book club. So you still technically have 3 and a little bit weeks left. Plenty of time to read 1,000 pages.
Right,
I hope.
for sure.
All right, Matt, that's it for our announcements. Let's get into the chapters themselves. We're beginning a new part today. So we finished part 1 and we're moving into part 2, June of 1958. I wonder what this part of the book is going to be about, Matt. I think it's probably going to be about June of 1958.
It sounds like a reasonable assumption.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more quotes here that I just wanted to quickly go over with you. The first is another quote from William Carlos Williams from his epic poem Patterson. We had one of these in the first part, and this time the quote says, "My surface is myself, under which to witness youth is buried. Roots? Everybody has roots." So I think this is really fitting, right? You know, like I think the first quote was about kind of being born in a bad place, in a bad world. And this one is specific to my surface is who I am. And under that, feeding that, creating that is my youth, who I was as a child. And that's what we're learning about these characters. We're going to learn about these adults through their experiences as children.
Yep, that seems like a pretty straightforward interpretation and
Mm-hmm.
connection to the text.
Yeah. The next one is a quote from Eddie Cochran, the singer, from his song Summertime Blues. There's really nothing to examine or inspect here, Matt. It's just a popular 1950s song, but I have some unfortunate news, Matt. This song didn't come out till 1959. This book takes place in 1958. And so, wow. It's disgusting.
What a blunder.
Yeah. How could you make a mistake like this, Stephen King? It can't be the song of the summer. It wasn't released yet, Stephen.
Well, other level of the tower, I guess we can say.
It doesn't even like say that it was released then. The quotes, I just thought it was funny that, like, if you listen to the song, this is very much a 50s song feel. Like, it's one of those things where, like, it's a song you could throw in there anytime in a movie you want to signal to people that it's the 50s.
I feel like even if Google had existed when King wrote this book, he wouldn't have fucking bothered to Google whether or not that song came out before June of 1958, because I don't really think he cares about that kind of thing.
Well, no, and like, even so, like, it's not as if he's saying the song is taking place in the, like, it's not like characters are sitting around listening to the song a year later. It's just a quote from the beginning of the book. I don't think was Patterson written before June of 1958. I don't even know.
As you say, it's just for flavor.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny that when I looked up this song, I happened to see it was not quite when this book was out. Anyway, let's get into chapter 4, which is titled "Ben Hanscom Takes a Fall." We didn't really talk about this with the last chapter very much, but chapter 3, 6 phone calls, each of our subsections had one of our characters, their name takes a. That was kind of the format of the chapter, of all 6 of those chapters. That is not going to be the case going forward. This is the last chapter that has takes in it. But I did think it was interesting that this chapter title kind of follows that previous format before we break off from it.
Yeah, it's like we're sort of falling down the rabbit hole almost into the past. I was thinking about the chapter titles, and we haven't really talked about the chapter titles explicitly that I can
Mm-mm.
recall. And I
No.
was thinking about like why bother have chapter titles, because sometimes King doesn't, right? In fact, I would even say usually he doesn't have chapter
Yeah, I
titles.
think
It's
that's
usually
right.
just chapter one, chapter two.
Hmm.
I was thinking about a book I read once. For some reason, it stuck in my head that they had a chapter called, I think it was called Cold Fat Raindrops. And it was called this because in the chapter it was raining. Um, and it always kind of struck me as a terrible chapter name, almost like a waste of like even bothering to have a chapter name because it's like I guess you could stretch and say he was trying to kind of be poetic about the nature of, you know, melancholy or something, whatever. Like the
Hmm.
point is, this is a great chapter name. I love it because it's as soon as you see he takes a fall, you're like, oh, the fall, that's bad. I'm invested, and it's just the title of the chapter. It's not even prose.
Yeah.
And similarly, like the takes a bath, like that was what basically immediately made me aware, like, oh no, he's gonna kill himself. Okay, so I just think it's a really cool and unique thing he's doing with this particular book with the chapter titles.
Yeah, no, you're really right. I mean, chapter titles can either be like super important or not matter at all, and
Right.
and usually I think it's more the latter. And I do like these. I think they're like we have the 1-2 punch of after the flood, after the festival in the first two chapters, which really serves to link those two events: the death of Adrian Mellon and the death of uh, Georgie, like are linked. Both in the type of death that happens, their location, and then the chapter titles really link them together. I do really like the chapter 4 kind of follows the rhythm and the structure set up by the 6 phone calls subchapters, because it's almost as if King is kind of leading you into the next part of the book gently, by holding true to the same naming structure, and then we're going to kind of wildly diverge from there. And then our next chapter this week that we're going to get to here in an hour or so is Bill Denbrough beats the devil. But importantly, Bill Denbrough beats the devil one, which is something we've talked about that King does before, right? He puts this chapter title in there, and then he puts a one after it, and then you have to go like, oh, that means there's going to be a two, and it gets
Uh-huh.
you kind of thinking about what that would be. It's
That's
fun
fun.
stuff all around.
Yeah. Once again, my favorite Kingism in general is to be like, something bad's gonna happen. I'll even tell you what it is, and it won't make you feel any more relaxed. Obviously, you're just
Yep.
gonna worry. Okay, like exactly this takes a fall. Okay, where's he gonna fall? Is this a physical fall? Is this a metaphorical fall? Begin
Hmm.
asking questions, getting invested. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. But before we head back to the summer of 1958, Matt, we have some stuff to deal with back in '85 as the adult Ben Hanscom has boarded his plane back to Derry. I wanted to note here at the beginning, for your sake, Matt, and for the sake of anyone that's following along via audiobook, that for at least these first two chapters, possibly more, but we don't know yet, all of the events that take place in 1985 are written in italics. And it's not until we jump back to 58 that the text straightens out, as it were. I think this is really cool. Like, it's a great way of signaling that for this, at least this part of the story, is focused on 1958, and this is the primary driving force. So this is the text at its normal, that's its normal way, and then the parts where we're touching base with the elder versions of the characters, to kind of remind us that they're still there, and this is a story, maybe even primarily about them. That is hinted at, or showed in a different way, showed in the italicized text. Just a really interesting structural conceit, I think.
Yeah, the ground truth, or you could say the roots, are in fact the real story, and what's happening in the future is sort of almost a later echo. This
Mhm.
just occurred to me. I don't know whether this is anything or not, but I just thought it was interesting that the two timelines are 58 and 85, which are obviously flipped digit order. Um, and I mean, I get that we're doing like a gap of like 27 or 28 years, and this is consistent with that. But I just think it's kind of cool that it's like the past is a mirror of the future. 58 is a mirror of 85. Just kind of a cool idea.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to say this last week, but I thought I'd see if you noticed it first when we were talking about the whole, why 27 years, why
Okay.
27 years. And I think the reason was because it allowed Stephen King to do this really cool, slightly palindromic thing with those years. I think you're totally right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also just has to do with the nature of how a person is at those two ages, but I suspect he chose these exact years because he does, like you said, this slightly palindromic thing. It's
Yep.
cool. I like it.
Yep. Yeah. Interestingly enough, we once again begin an adult Ben chapter not in his point of view. We start in the flight attendant's head as she thinks Ben is going to be a problem passenger, and then later thinks that he's dead. I just think that's an interesting thing to call out here. That once again we are kind of taking our time before we move into the actual headspace of Ben.
Yeah. So many of my favorite Stephen King characters are identified as problem passengers by stewardesses. It's really a very elite group.
No, that's so true. I'd never thought about it that way, but you're so right.
Uh,
I wonder, like, I don't know. I feel like King flew on planes a lot, especially as he, became more and more popular of an author and was expected to appear places and go to things and just spent a lot of time on planes and probably just spent a lot of time thinking on planes and seeing passengers and how passengers and stewardesses interacted and all that.
yeah. I mean, can I tell you another thing that I think it is? Just this is somewhat from my perspective as a writer, you could say, as someone who dabbles. Um, like sometimes you want to be able to write a scene that is basically just, I want my character to be thinking about something. But that's horrible. That's really boring writing, and everyone knows that, even me. So what you do is you have them be thinking about something while something is going on, or while they're in kind of an unusual situation,
Mm,
or they're having to deal with some immediate physical thing while also ruminating.
sure.
And an airplane is a dramatic, it's a much more dramatic situation than waiting for a bus, for example.
Yeah. I mean, you're surrounded by strangers in very close quarters, and some of those strangers, like, it is their job to serve you, and so they have to interact with you in some ways.
Right.
So it's a place where you can have a character ruminate on things while also being forced into interactions with people, and so you can play off of what they look like or how they're acting. Or yeah, no, that's a great point. It's no, I love it.
Yeah, it's just basic making you actually have something in the scene to care about. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool.
So Ben is thinking about the old days, about how he first met his friends. He thinking about dropping in on them while they were building a dam, and we get this wonderful writing here. Ben Hanscom sits in his first class seat, suspended amid the thunders at 27,000 feet, his face turned to the window, and he feels the wall of time grow suddenly thin. Some terrible slash wonderful Paris peristal. Blah. I said this word before we started because I knew I was going to get it wrong. Peristalsis has begun to take place. He thinks, "My God, I'm being digested by my own past." I
Oh man,
I, I love that so much, including the word that I just stumbled over 16 times before saying it.
it is a perfect word for this.
Yeah.
And I mean, Scott, you know this, but so everyone else knows, I just got back from my 20-year high school reunion this weekend. And and Ben, my friend, let me tell you something. Same, bro.
I love that that's what you're going through right now, though, because this is the thing I love about this book. Like the last time I read this book before now, I was with my wife celebrating her 30th birthday. We went to Hawaii, and I took this big fucking book with me because I'm an idiot, and sitting on the beaches of Hawaii, reading this novel, thinking about my life with and now in my 30s, me and my wife, we've been married a few years, and thinking about childhood, and it's just like it's a book that causes you to kind of think about these things, and you get the added experience of being in a situation that also causes you to think about these things.
Oh yeah.
That's really cool. That's really
It's
cool.
This book has been a huge amplifier on my sort of introspection into that experience, because it is I think that's one of those experiences that always hits harder than maybe you think it will. And then
Hmm.
having this book sort of preload you with a lot of thinking about your past content really got me revved up. Having a having one of those midlife crises. The thing about me though is I have a crisis like every 6 months.
Sure.
Um, so I kind of spread it out, you know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
You've
anyway,
been
I'm
having
probably
your midlife crisis since you were like 23.
exactly. I absolutely have this. Scott knows me. He knows this is not a joke. Yeah, I'm probably going to mention this high school reunion like 15 more times. By the way, just be forewarned.
No, I mean, I think that's fine. And I hope you do. Like, I don't know how much our audience loves this, but I feel like reading stories, especially stories like this, like it's important to talk about the way the story pings off and reflects your life. And like, I
Mhm.
mean, we're about to get into it, but the character of Ben, I relate to a whole bunch for a wide variety of reasons. And so I don't think I could talk about the story at all without talking about the ways in which it's made me reflect on the memories I have of being a kid like Ben.
Yep. Yep. I agree.
All right, so we dive into Ben's past with the final bell of the school year. Summer has officially begun and school is out. And I don't know, like we kind of just perfectly set this up because I don't know about you, but like Ben, I was transported to my childhood like immediately. I have it's the kind of remarkable thing that I think this book does, and I've talked about this before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. I don't think about the experience of the final bell ringing and knowing that you have all of summer ahead of you. You have the entirety of summer vacation. And I think the book puts it beautifully as like, it's 2 months per the calendar, but the calendar was lying. The time stretched out almost infinitely, right?
Mhm.
I don't think about that thing, but like the second you read it and experience it in the story, you immediately acutely remember what that feeling was like.
Mhm.
Like I just you read this and you just get this real distinct memory of it, exactly what the opportunity and the hopefulness and the joy of that final bell and what summer would be. And I liked school. Like I didn't hate school. Like Ben doesn't hate school either, but there's just something about summer vacation as a kid that is like nothing else.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's magic. It really is. I mean, if
Hmm.
magic is anything, I think that's one of the beautiful things that Stephen King talks about in his books in general is the idea that, you know, m- life is magic. Life is full of magic. Not
Yeah.
meaning the supernatural, but meaning the way in which that a mundane thing can be made more than mundane by our perception of it. And summer vacation is the definition of magical in that
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Wonderful. So we see that Ben and the rest are just about to graduate fifth grade. And I want to talk about that choice for a bit with you here. I think it's a perfect age and a perfect place in life to put these children at. I think it's tough to talk about this actually because I know schools maybe in the 50s didn't do it like this, or schools now don't do it like this. But when I was in school, fifth grade was the last year of elementary school, right? We did kindergarten through fifth in elementary. We did six, seven, and eight in middle school, and then nine through 12 in high school. Um, I don't know if that's the way your school did it or not.
That's the way my school did. That's not the way my kids' school does it, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
the way my
feel like
school did
that's
it.
not the case anymore because I
Mhm.
feel like the school my son will be going to, I believe sixth is still an elementary school.
It's
Um,
almost like they realize that middle school is a thing that shouldn't exist, and they're trying to, like, squeeze it out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I don't even know if the book tells us whether that's the way Ben and the rest of the kids' school is going to be, that he's just graduated from fifth grade and is going to be moving on to a different school. But even if it's not, I think for me, it was this really wonderful place because fifth grade is such a weird year, right? And 11 is such a weird age because you're still definitely a kid, like definitely you're still a kid, but you're right on the cusp of that. Like in fifth grade, graduating from fifth grade, right on the cusp of moving towards middle school, which starts pushing you into those teen years. 11, you're right on the cusp of puberty and moving into that stuff. It's this perfect threshold moment of graduating from fifth grade. You're not in sixth grade yet, but you've moved out of elementary school, and that is, I think, a perfect way of describing where these characters are at right now. They're in this summer, this magical summer, as you aptly put it, between their childhood and their adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we've had occasion to talk about this basic idea before because Stephen King usually picks his kid characters to be roughly 11 years old.
Hmm.
which is generally end of fifth grade, beginning of sixth grade age.
Yep.
Um, Maybe a little bit broader than that, close enough. And that's what most of his kid characters end up being. And like I think
Yep.
that's interesting because I don't know that 11 was any more crucial of an age for me than 9 or 12 or 14 or any other age, but I think you're right that it is this liminal inflection point between sort of the kidness of elementary school and the more adult uh, heavy stuff of middle
Hmm.
school. And I guess I do think it's interesting that King fixates there the way he does, because I literally can't think on top of my head of like a main character kid character in King's works. Okay, Danny Torrance is the only one I can think of,
Hmm.
who isn't 11. Danny Torrance is like
Yeah.
6. Yeah, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
true. And I'm wondering, do you remember how old the kids in Lord of the Flies were?
No, I don't.
I was trying to look that up while you were talking because I'm curious to see that, and there's nothing in the Wikipedia entry that is giving me an easy answer. But yeah, I think you're right. It is, it is. I hadn't thought about this until you did it, but you're right that I don't remember 11 as being this critical time in my life. Certainly not. I remember elementary school. I remember fifth grade, and I remember fifth grade for the reasons we talked about last week, which is I had a teacher I didn't particularly like. But no, I don't. I don't like have this clear sense of 11 as this important time. To me, I mean, it was like I have a very clear sense of 7 as an important time, but that's because we moved from New Jersey to Texas, and so that
Hmm.
was like this big moment of change in my life.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't really remember that. But you're absolutely right that this is a place and a time the King is really fixated on. And I think it's one of those things where perhaps the reason I don't remember it is because it's the type of thing where you don't know it while it's happening. Like, and maybe that's one thing where these characters are a little bit unique, because Ben definitely does seem to be aware of the kind of the push of adulthood coming in on him. And that's not
hmm
something that I remember being particularly conscious of. I mean, I feel like a lot of times being a child is trying to push away from the childish stuff as quickly as possible and move to the adult stuff as quickly as possible, which is another way in which fifth grade is this uniquely interesting experience, because you're still definitely a kid, but you're the biggest of the kids in your school, which makes you feel like you're older and more important than you are.
that's true. Yeah, I do remember that feeling. Like you're the big man on campus as a 10-year-old. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. I don't know. It is really interesting that he's really interested, but in this particular place, because yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that 13 is more in that liminal spot than 11 is.
Yeah, I mean, I plan to talk more about this later in the conversation, I think, but I was reflecting on how between the age of like 10 and 14, 15 is when you really start to become a teenager in the sense of like becoming increasingly introspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was thinking about how I think this book even touches on this a bit, but like you kind of don't know how to handle this new like brain circuitry that is coming online
Yeah.
when it comes online. It's like, what the hell is happening? I'm I never my brain is sort of working in an entirely new way and it's coming on
Mm-hmm.
pretty quickly, and I don't know how to control it, or even if it can be controlled. And the truth is, it just is part of you, and you have to kind of adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the book doesn't like explicitly like really go into this, but it did just remind me how this is the age when oh yeah, I think the bit I'm going to reference is coming up soon anyway, so I'll just wait for that.
Sure. Sure. No, I like where you're going though. I definitely want to talk about that more.
Okay.
So we do see, though, Matt, that Ben clearly has a huge crush on a little girl with a name that will be familiar to us, young Beverly Marsh. We see that Bev is clearly poor, that she's using language not, quote, fit for ladies, and has a fading bruise on one of her cheeks. But despite all that, or perhaps in some ways because of it, Ben loves Bev. He kind of says that very directly. He loves her. But Ben is fat, and he thinks to himself that fat boys were probably only allowed to love girls on the inside. And it, I love how King depicts Ben's overweightness here. Like I love the choice, the detail of the choice to have Ben decide to wear nothing but extremely baggy sweaters. We see that like he came out of winter break. He wore a brand new shirt that his mom bought for him. Someone said something mean about his weight, and then it's like, okay, sweaters, baggy sweaters, nothing but
Uh-huh.
baggy sweaters. And it's really interesting. And this is one of those areas that does relate pretty personally for me. I was not like a fat kid at Ben's age. I was still like basically playing baseball and soccer all the time, and so I was normal sized. But like as we moved into like select sports and into school sports, I stopped doing all that, and I eventually became a pretty big kid. And let me tell you, I didn't do like the wear like an extremely baggy sweatshirt thing, but I definitely did. And the other fat people listening might know what I'm talking about here. But I did this thing where like you put your hands in your pockets and like with your thumb out of your pocket, holding on to your shirt and pushing it away from your stomach. So when you're like walking against the wind isn't blowing your shirt into you and like giving everyone a perfect form fit of what your stomach looks like, which is like it's like a silly thing to do because like we see here, everyone knows that Ben is really big, right? Like this is not hiding anything, and yet it's all about him trying to hide and disappear inside something despite that not like doing anything.
Mhm.
And I don't know, there's just something so for me personally like so immediately relatable and absolutely heartbreaking about
Yeah.
this child, this still a child that has just internalized this hatred of his weight so early and quickly, that he doesn't let anyone see any part of him, both physically, and then I think the other thing we see is mentally, personality wise. Like he has no connections with anyone, no relationship with anyone. He's hiding all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally empathize. I love the way his feelings about all of this are dramatized, and as you say, through the choices that he makes as a character.
Yeah.
um yeah, and like I think when you have like a body image thing, you do things that in your own mind they're compensating, because it's
Yeah.
almost unbearable to imagine that you can't do anything about this, and so
Hmm.
it's almost like a compulsion to just do something, and tell yourself
Yes.
that you've yeah. It's funny. I when I was I was gonna say when I was a kid. The truth is, for my entire life, I've been like extremely underweight, and which uh, causes a man to be self conscious, because men are supposed to be strong. So
Hmm.
I would actually wear baggy sweaters in high school, not constantly, but often, just to like make it less clear that I had no muscle whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I can at least I empathize in that way. It's interesting because I bet everybody can kind of empathize with something about their body they're not happy with and wanting to kind
Yeah.
of hide that. And so
And the ways in which they hide it, and despite being ineffective, do some small thing to make you feel a little bit better about it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right,
Matt, with our powers combined, we are almost one
yeah,
normal person.
yeah. Yeah, that's what we've always been trying to average ourselves out. That's what we're doing.
No, but yeah, I mean it's really heartbreaking, and I think it is relatable, even if your particular thing was not weight. Everyone has something they're self-conscious of that they kind of change their image around to hide or mask. And I mean, like, yeah, like there's no doubt like people could tell I had a belly even if I was like pulling my shirt slightly out
Mhm.
so it wasn't getting blown against my belly in the wind, but it made me feel slightly less insecure about it, and
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
all you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. In any case, King cultivates a huge amount of compassion for Ben with these scenes.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that is the absolute truth here, is that you just immediately feel for this poor kid.
Yep.
And then we put him through the ringer here because at at the back of the room making fun of Ben, we get to meet the frequently mentioned Henry Bowers. This guy was mentioned, I think, in almost every single one of our chapter 3 characters, and here we get to meet him. And Matt, here's what he looks like. Here's Henry. Henry's hair was cut in an angry-looking flat top, short enough for the white of his scalp to show through. He butch-waxed the front with a tube he always carried in the hip pocket of his jeans, and as a result, the hair just above his forehead looked like the teeth of an oncoming power motor. An odor of sweat and juicy fruit gum always hung about him. He wore a pink motorcycle jacket with an eagle on the back to school. And of course, there's a little anecdote that a fourth grade kid makes the mistake of laughing at his pink jacket, and that kid is pounded into oblivion.
Uh-huh.
That's Henry, Matt. What did you think of this physical description of the great Henry Bowers?
It's great. I mean, I hate him, obviously. I love how weird and specific it is, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and I guess that's always the thing with the way King does character work, but like juicy fruit gum and sweat,
Yeah.
it's like this, it immediately, it's the closest thing that a description can make, can come to making me feel physically nauseous at the thought of a smell, because it's like a sweet smell mixed with a disgusting body odor smell. It's just like, it's great. It's great.
Can we go on the record here right now and say that juicy fruit gum is like the worst kind of gum?
I don't even remember the last time I've had juicy fruit, so
I mean, me neither, but it loses its flavor in like 30 seconds.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's a terrible gum. It's awful gum.
Want some gum? This conversation is making me want some gum.
You can't chew gum while podcasting, Matt. It's not allowed.
But I'm really conscious of my mouth now.
Okay. Well, that's going to be great audio, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ben has made an enemy out of Henry for failing to help him cheat on his exams. And this is where I think we see the first kind of big theme starting to arise out of this chapter. This idea that we've been talking about of a child on the cusp of adulthood. We see here this thought Ben has. The first was that if Mrs. Douglas caught Henry cheating answers off his paper, both of them would get zeros on their tests. The second was that if he didn't let Henry copy, Henry would almost surely catch him after school and administer the fabled double pump to him, probably with Huggins holding one of his arms and Chris holding the other. These were the thoughts of a child, and there was nothing surprising about that because he was a child. The third and last thought, however, was more sophisticated, almost adult. He might get me all right, but maybe I can keep out of his way for the last week of school. I'm pretty sure I can, if I really try, and he'll forget over the summer, I think. Yeah. He's pretty stupid. If he flunks his test, maybe he'll stay back again. And if he stays back, I'll get ahead of him. I won't be in the same room with him anymore. I'll get to junior high before he does. I might be free. So Matt, what do you think of this first kind of depiction of the child brain in Ben and the adult thoughts kind of starting to crowd each other?
Yeah. I thought about this quite a bit, actually. This ties into my earlier riff on the idea of how your thought processes change, and I was thinking for a minute, I was like, maybe I like actually diverge from Mr. King's interpretation of the difference between adulthood and childhood, and I thought about it more, and I was like, no, I think I actually don't diverge, but I did want. There was something about this that jumped out to me, and I think the thing is, I think children are in many cases even more capable of cold reptilian selfishness than adults are, because kids haven't been socialized. They do have like a natural empathy that I think gets socialized out of you, but sometimes they're capable of some pretty amazing selfishness. And this struck me as not entirely a thought that a child would be incapable of. But then I thought more about it, and I was like, well, the part of it that is not childish is that it's thinking well ahead. It's like it's long-term planning, and children, like real children do not really do long-term planning. They can't keep track of where they put their most prized possession from one day to the next, you know. It's not it's not like, it's not the ruthlessness of the thought that makes it an adult thought. It's the calculation and the long-term planning that makes it an adult thought.
Yeah, the sophistication, I think, is the word that King uses here. I agree with that. I agree that like selfishness is pretty are pretty built into us naturally, and kids are certainly extremely selfish. But yeah, this thought is long term. It's sophisticated. It's kind of planning and thinking and strategizing. It's not just about the immediate consequence of getting beaten up. It's the long term consequence of like, I can take control of my life through this long planned out thing. Like I can see the cause and effect chain from this moment forward into junior high school.
Yeah. Yeah, and the idea, I mean, just to say it out loud, the idea that like if I cause him to flunk this test, then he will stop being a problem for me. That is a pretty ruthless thought. Like it's a very cold thought. Which is interesting because Ben is generally a very warm and caring and empathic person. But
Yeah.
I don't see any contradiction there. I mean, he's desperate to get out from under this guy's thumb, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, like, I guess it, it's not that I disagree that it's ruthless, but it's also just like withholding help, which, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to say like it's ruthless to not let someone cheat on you.
Well, yeah, maybe ruthless is not the right word. It's the fact that he actually connects it up with the consequence and then makes the decision anyway,
Yeah,
um, instead of just saying, whatever, screw it.
yeah.
Like he probably has in the past.
Well, and he also admits that the short, like I think the most adult thing to me is the idea that the short term cost will be outweighed by the long term benefit, right? That like
Yeah,
he knows that this is probably going to cause him to get beaten up. But he looks at that as, okay, well, I'll get beaten up today, but I won't get beaten up 20 times in the future, and that feels more mature, more adult, more sophisticated to me.
yeah, I like that. Yeah,
So Ben leaves school with his entire day in front of him, and he heads to the library, stopping by the store to buy a whole bunch of candy with a windfall of bottles. I actually, Matt, as we move towards the library, there's this bit where King like ruminates on Ben's loneliness that I think is one of my favorite things about this chapter. It says here, I think the basic question is like, if you asked Ben Hanscom if he was lonely, his response would be like, "What? No." Uh, and and it says here, a child blind from birth doesn't even know he's blind until someone tells him. Even then, he has only the most academic idea of what blindness is. Only the formerly sighted have a real grip on the thing. Ben Hanscom had no sense of being lonely because he had never been anything but. If the condition had been new or more localized, he might have understood, but loneliness both encompassed his life and overreached it. It simply was, like his double jointed thumb or the funny little jag on one of his front teeth, the little jag his tongue began running over whenever he was nervous. This is a really fascinating idea, right? That like his existence has been this and only this, and so he's still a child to where he wouldn't even categorize it. I think this is another very childish thing, not even be thinking about the idea of loneliness.
yeah. Another thing that I was thinking about in context of loneliness and the difference in the perspective of these two characters is that Ben never thinks about loneliness explicitly. He never thinks about the fact that he doesn't have any siblings, right? He does, like, but when we get to Bill's chapter, like half of that chapter is about the what a powerful source of simple belonging just having a sibling provides,
Yeah.
and then furthermore how devastating it is to have that sibling be taken.
Hmm.
So I just like that was a really uh, vivid contrast to me between the two characters is how he doesn't even know what Ben doesn't even know what he's missing. Bill, he is also lonely, I think, and he the difference between them is he knows what he's missing because he had a brother and then the brother was killed.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right. And there's this really interesting kind of contrast we're making with these two characters that I think we'll talk about more as we get into Bill. But like Ben is a character who like loves passionately and deeply and is extremely lonely. Bill is this character who, having gone through this trauma, is experiencing this incredible amount of grief and his reflection on that grief is this living life kind of on the edge of death at all times. And these are very, very different feelings and emotions attached to these two characters, and it's really interesting kind of jumping from one to the other.
For sure. Yeah.
So another thing I want to talk about, Matt, is libraries. I like King does such a good job with this, seeing the library through Ben's eyes. Like, this is a thing that once again transports me to childhood. Like, I really do hope that kids these days have experiences like what it was to go to the library. I think, libraries are kind of coming back in a real way. They were kind of dying out. And then I think this latest generation is using the library a lot more than the previous one did. And that's really cool because there's something just kind of magical about going to the library. So you're just in this place where all these books, and like the idea that, hey, you can just check some of them out and then read them. And I don't know, it was just a really, really cool thing. And I think part of that is the quietness, like the unspoken rule about talking. Like, I don't know. I loved the library as a kid.
Me too. Me too. I there were certain years of school where I would spend a lot of recess in the library. And I've always loved libraries. I should take my kids to the library this weekend. That's a good
Mhm.
idea. Yes, I
I'm
will
going to
do
do
that.
that too. Let's do it.
Yeah. All right.
Library weekend.
Sounds good.
So King does this amazing thing here, though, where we have like this the tranquility and the serenity of the library as it is to Ben, and how it's interrupted by a curfew sign that is posted in the library, which reminds Ben and us of the world around him, the world of Derry. This is the summer of 1958. Georgie is dead, and he was just the first. We know that 4 more kids have died since him. And I think this is so fantastically well done, Matt, because it's not that we've forgotten the first few chapters of the novel. We haven't. We read those chapters and we experienced that underlying dread and horror of those, and we haven't forgotten them. But for the last few pages, we've been like inundated with like the problems of a young, overweight 11-year-old boy, which, while they are problems, like he has issues and problems, and I don't want to minimize those things, they do seem like so quaint and mundane compared to like the death of children or being hunted by a monster clown and things like that. And I think this sign here and this moment, and this moment where he's at his most serene and most tranquil, allows the reality of the world to kind of come crashing back in on us. It's almost as if to say, okay, I'm glad you're enjoying this Ben stuff, but it's gonna we're in a horror book. It's gonna get
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I love this as a method of playing with tension, because at no point during this earlier Ben stuff was I thinking like, oh my God, when are we going to get past the boring kid stuff and get back to the evil clown plot? Like, I was just
Mm-hmm.
totally engrossed in Ben's world and his concerns, and like my sense of the stakes correspondingly kind of implicitly, subconsciously shifted. And then we get back to we're suddenly reminded, like you said, crashing back into the reality of what story we're actually in. We're not in some YA book about a kid who struggles with his weight. We're in it. And there's gonna be some bad shit coming. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very fun sort of shocking moment. I agree.
Yeah, and it's really great because even from here on out, like the things Ben was worried about at the first part of the chapter is his bullies and his bullies finding him, and we have this kind of hanging over them because we did have the moment where he walks into the library and the bullies see him and we know they're waiting for him to come out. And it's like even like the quaint and I don't want to minimize bullies because bullying is serious and it's awful, but like even the everyday childish bullying that you would possibly expect is about to get cranked up to 11 when we see what Henry actually does to him. And so it's like a signifier that everything's about to get considerably worse.
Yeah, definitely.
So being forced to remember the world, Ben kind of goes through what he knows about the disappearances so far, and it allows us to kind of see what adults in Derry do about these disappearances, how they're dealing with them, because we see through Ben's mom that she knows she gives her son a watch and tells him to use the buddy system. So we're good. Still
And
walk home from school by yourself, but buddy system.
buddy system with your friends that I'm not aware that you don't have because
Yeah.
I'm totally inattentive. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, Ben's mom is so fascinating because she's not like I don't know if I'd go so far to say as like she's a bad mother. And I don't think Ben's home life is as near as bad as what we'll see next chapter with Bill and his parents, you know, unable to get over their grief of their other lost son. Nor we can assume like Eddie and his mom, because we've kind of been primed for the incredibly unhealthiness of that relationship. But there's still this kind of this gulf between them, as she's a single mom with one son, you know, spending most of her time working, and she just isn't aware of her kid very much.
Yeah, right. And I think what you said a second ago, like she's not an awful mom, she's not an exceptionally bad mom.
No.
And I think that's kind of the point is like, you know, I can't point to any particularly horrible parenting mistake that his mom is making. You know, I might tell her, hey, you know, maybe only let him eat a couple helpings of dinner, but I don't even
Yeah.
know if that would really help because I know a lot of this stuff is hormonal anyway. So like, what could you do to fix it? And it's like, I don't know. This is kind of how parenting was in the 50s. I get the feeling anyway. I mean,
Sure.
I just read this like article the other day about how the parenting like 100 years ago, 200 years ago was like so laissez-faire that you wouldn't believe it. Like if you read some of the stories, you'd just be like, that can't be the way it was. But it was basically just absolute neglect. It was the parents had to keep, you know, the farm running, keep themselves alive, and even now, you know, our world is so alien from that we consider even what his mom is doing to be a form of neglect when all it really is. I mean, I think in the 50s at least, it would probably just be like, yeah, I mean, she's living her life. What do you want? You want her to interrogate her son about his friends, and what is she supposed to do about it if he doesn't have friends, huh? You know, so
Yeah.
it's just kind of like parenting in the 50s, parenting in general. It's kind of an impossible job, and uh I don't think we're meant to blame her particularly. I think
No.
this is just the way the world is.
Well, and we certainly see that Ben doesn't blame her, right? Like, there's
Mhm.
this. I find this stuff so fascinating because, like, Ben is like, I love the section where he talks about how she, you know, continually gives him leftovers that he happily gulps down, and he hates himself for it, but never her. He would never hate her for doing that. He would never blame her for doing that. And I think that part of that is, again, the fact that Ben is still a child, right? And you see your parent as this kind of like perfect entity, perfect creature, the representation that all of is right and good in the world, and that of course fades over time as you become more adult and you realize the mistakes your parents have made, which they invariably will because we're human beings. But that is kind of really interesting in how Ben loves his mother. He does, and he doesn't blame her. But there is this really interesting little wedge between them, this little disconnect, this small layer of distrust. The book describes it as this idea that she doesn't know him well enough to know that he doesn't have any friends. It creates this situation in which Ben feels like he can't be honest with her, right? That can't tell her what happened to him back in January, which is a thing we'll see what that actual thing is a little bit later in the chapter, but it's presented to us now as like she gives him an opportunity to be honest with her, and he chooses not to be. And that's like a really kind of fascinating exploration of like what the adult child or a becoming adult child's decision to lie to their parents, like where that comes from. Like his kids lie all the time. Like I'm not saying lying to your parents is adult behavior, because it's not. But like this kind of lie is, I think, different from the normal like kid constant lying thing.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting wrinkle, because on some inarticulate level, he knows that she's hurting him in some
Mm-hmm.
way,
Mm-hmm.
and that's such an interesting, authentic seeming reason to inject this distrust. Where
Yeah.
he's like, well, if I can't, if I already know that, you know, sort of despite your best intentions, you're capable of hurting me, then I can't trust you with this secret, which if you mishandled this secret, then you'll hurt me even worse with this.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating way of driving a small wedge between a parent and a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he almost can't even verbalize the idea that she could be hurting him, right? Like that's the thing that like we don't we don't ever see him actually consciously say that because he couldn't possibly. And that's really it's an interesting thing about the narrator here, Matt, because the narrator is in this very close third person. We see Ben's thoughts, but we also get like commentary on it, right? Like the idea of, oh, if you asked Ben if he was lonely, he would never say yes, right? Like we have the narrator kind of inject themselves, not in the direct like I this, I that, but in a much more, you know, we are going to acknowledge that there's things about the stuff that we, the reader, and I, the narrator, know that this child does not.
Yeah, that's true. The narrator definitely. There's nothing textual that says that the narrator is like the older Ben, but I feel like some of these things are like the things that the older Ben might conceivably be thinking as he reflects on his childhood.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot because it's kind of like he's remembering these things. We established the kind of conceit of this chapter is that
Mhm.
he's sitting on an airplane remembering his childhood, and perhaps that is we're seeing the idea of that remembrance injecting itself.
I
Um,
think that's
he's
probably where
telling
I
the
got the.
story of what happened, kind
Yeah,
of.
and it's very similar framing for Bill's next chapter, and I think that's where I got the feeling that we're sort of watching him almost relive this, but relive it with his own adult mind making commentary over it. You could
Yeah,
argue.
yeah.
Um,
No, I like that.
yeah.
Awesome. So while reading, Ben spots a postcard display and decides to buy one. He then spends half an hour or so working together a haiku for his love, Beverly. It's a really cool little detail that Ben's love of haiku here, Matt, because King allows us to draw like the direct line between this kid and an eventual architect, right? The thing about haiku he loves is the structure of it. It has rules. It has clearly defined rules that you're supposed to follow. You follow those rules, and so like he doesn't seem like a person that really likes he likes story, but he likes reading, but he doesn't seem like the type of person that likes creating art in that way. But a haiku is art in structure. And so he really, really likes it. And we see here that after half an hour or so, he comes up with this haiku. Your hair is winter fire, January embers. My heart burns there too.
So,
So Matt,
uh-huh.
tell me what you almost immediately discovered about this haiku.
Well, the first thing anybody does when they hear haiku is they go, "Your hair is winter fire." Yeah, that's not right. That's not a correct haiku.
Yeah.
It's 665, not 575. Which I instantly was like, "Oh, that's great," because he's a 10-year-old and he kind of gets the concept of a haiku, but not quite. And I kind of like I love what you said a second ago about him being an architect because it's like, well, he's playing with the structure of it. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
yes, technically it's not 575, but it does have 17 total syllables. They're just
Mm-hmm.
rearranged a little bit.
Yeah.
He's a creative artist. He can do whatever the hell he wants. You don't nobody arrests you if you break the rules of haiku. So
Yeah.
it's fine. In fact, I like this more than if it had been a correct haiku, honestly.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, no, I love that so much. I also love that the book doesn't really call attention to it, but I think you're right. You know, we kind of meet Ben as an adult, as an architect who is called one of the most promising young architects of the United States, but also is met with a little controversy. Right, we're seeing that some of the buildings he's worked on, there's constant debate whether this was a well-designed building or an eyesore. Right, and that shows, I think, Ben's propensity to work within a structure, but his lack of fear at pushing against that structure and changing it a little bit. So yeah, I love this idea that like a building is a building, but maybe we can move things around each other. A haiku has 17 syllables, but maybe we can just move those syllables around a little bit. And like he didn't do it on purpose, right? Like
right.
he didn't like there's no point in the text where we see him go, oh, it's not 575. I haven't actually made a haiku, but that's fine. He just loves the idea of there being a structure, and he fiddles with something until he finds something he likes, and it doesn't quite line up, but it's okay because he likes it, and that's all that
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah, he knows his tastes, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this feels very King to be like, yeah, there's like rules to writing, but also you just got to do what feels right.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah,
And I kind of like that the text doesn't draw immediate attention to it, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like how different the scene would have played, and maybe it would have still been good. I don't know, but how different the scene would have played if the narrator had injected here and said something like, "As we all know, this was not an actual haiku,
Uh-huh.
but close enough." It doesn't do that. It just allows this moment to be there, and maybe it'll happen later.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I don't know. I really liked it.
Yeah, exactly. I figure this will be a narratively relevant postcard, one way or the other. And
Mhm.
but again, don't it doesn't. I just think it's a cool touch. Like it's a great touch of
Yeah,
character that he got the structure slightly wrong. And
yeah,
but I love the archetype of the architect who is willing to break the rules. That's
yep,
always my favorite.
yep. So Ben walks out of the library and mails the anonymous postcard, walking on into the day and, of course, into trouble. Before the attack on Ben begins in earnest, though, Matt, King steps back and gives us a brief geography lesson of Derry, Maine. We learn about the Kenduskeag River that carves the town in two, the canal that supports it through downtown, and, of course, the Barrens, the undeveloped southwestern floodplains of the river, where Ben is heading towards right now.
Why are we paying so much attention to the water system, Scott?
Hmm? Uh,
Scott, hello, Scott.
uh, uh,
Um,
uh.
oh, okay. I guess you're busy.
Sorry, I was just drinking some non-sewer water there.
Yeah. So I think I basically said this. Did I say this last week, or did I say this to you privately? Anyway,
I don't
the
know. We
the
have to stop talking outside the podcast because it's
we
not conducive to our listeners.
yeah, that sounds like a really good idea for our friendship. All right. Uh, um, the clown is clearly associated with the water system. Clown
Mhm.
only ever shows up by the water, or in this case, um, well, not in this case. I'm thinking about the later case when he's
Yeah, you're
standing on the
jumping forward a
frozen
little bit,
lake,
but that's
jumping
okay.
forward a little bit. It's fine. And that seems pretty clear to me at this point, and I'll just leave that there, and we will move on.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it up now because I don't think I wrote it down for later when Ben is wandering through the barrens and he finds like the sewer pipes kind of sticking
Mhm.
out of the ground and this like machine like humming and churning coming from them, which he finds both fascinating and frightening a little bit there as
Yeah,
well. There's
I,
a lot of work being put towards the uncertainty and kind of scariness of the sewer system for sure.
yeah. I also picked up on that
Yeah.
at the moment. Yeah.
So Henry and his two cronies finally catch up to Ben, and things go bad very quickly. I really love how King handles the scene, though, Matt, because we do kind of sort of already know what's going to happen, right? We've already seen the H carved into Ben's stomach. And maybe we didn't suppose that this happened right here, right now, but regardless, we know that's going to happen eventually. But I think King does this really great thing because he uses both Belch and Victor and their reactions to Henry actually starting to carve into Ben's stomach to allow us to feel the escalation. There's this wonderful moment where Ben looks at their horror and surprise, and I think the text says something to the effect of, "It's as bad as you think it is, maybe worse." Right? This
Yeah.
idea that like we maybe like we're slotting this into your like everyday kind of young child, high school, elementary school bullying, and it's now moved somewhere else, somewhere dark, somewhere evil, which I think is great actually because the confrontation itself moves from here into the Barrens into that sewer area we were just talking about, right?
Mhm.
I don't know. What do you think of the kind of the how that moment plays out?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly effective. I do love how, you've characterized these three bullies somewhat as being massive pricks, but sort of normal. Like,
Hmm.
they occasionally beat kids up for the lunch money. It's they'll probably grow up and be deadbeats, but not murderers necessarily.
Yeah,
But except one of them though, he is actually a crazy, probably future murderer, and he's going to use a knife on a kid just like to get his jollies, basically. And
yeah,
even the other two bullies react to this with genuine horror and shock,
yeah,
kind of like not even really realizing what they've gotten themselves into. That
yeah.
that was really effective.
But I really do like that at the same time, King can't help but be King, and we do get a little bit of information about Henry Bowers, right? Like we learn that he's been held back, or he's not been held back, but he has to do summer school. And we learn that his father is not going to like this because he needs him to help on the farm this summer. And so he's going to have to spend half his summer back in school still. I think he says something to the effect of it would have been better if he was held back. Because his dad would have only beaten him up once, whereas now he's going to be beaten up throughout the entire summer. And so he's taking this kind of rage and fear of his father's violence that's going to be committed to him and channeling that through into Ben. So like we see, you're absolutely right. This guy seems like an absolute psychopath, and much worse than what you would classify as your normal school bully. But we also still spend time uh defining him and understanding him a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think typically King makes sure you at least understand, if not empathize with the
Yeah.
villains. And I think this
Yeah.
is no exception.
So Ben escapes Henry by kicking away from him and throwing himself into the wilderness below, into the barrens. I really love the writing here. Everything happened fast then, but to Ben Hanscom, it all seems slow. It all seemed to happen in a series of shutter clicks, like action stills in a Life magazine photo essay. His panic was gone. He had discovered something inside him suddenly, and because it had no use for panic, that something just ate the panic whole. I love this. Like we're demonstrating the quality of these characters, right? Like
Mhm.
so far we've seen Ben as a very passionate, lovely little kid that we like a great deal, but he's also kind of constantly in this mode of terror. He's constantly afraid, and we see here what he does when pushed up against that fear, when pushed up against that stuff, as he finds a steel inside him,
Yeah.
as Roland calls it.
Yeah. No, it's great because, when the little kid fear is this pervasive hovering fear, which becomes grinding. But now he's been pushed to the extremity of like, you have to do something. You no longer have the choice to just grin and bear it. You have to do something, and then he finds that steel. And it's very satisfying. It's very cool. It's very cool to watch him fight back. Like he doesn't even really give himself credit for it, but it's actually kind of a badass scene here where he does this brave, almost foolhardy thing to get out of the situation, and then he
Yeah,
and then he sort of it sort of turns into an actual fight,
yeah,
which is again very impressive since he was like paralyzed with fear previously, and now he's you know commando battling these three older, I guess they're the same age, not older, but these three more violent, more aggressive boys. So it's great.
yeah. No, he's kind of a badass. I mean, he trips Henry. I love the moment where he trips Henry. Henry falls down and he's like, "Oh my god, I killed him!" And he goes over to check on him to make sure he's okay because he's Ben. And then Henry like grabs him and the fight resumes again.
Yeah,
Like I don't know. I really love that moment.
yeah, it's great.
So, as we said, Ben kind of fights back against the three of them. He ends up getting away, bruised and battered, but only carved up a little bit, just one letter.
Right.
Ben manages. Yeah, it looks silver linings, man. You know,
Yeah.
you could just turn that into anything. I mean, lots of words start with H. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be Henry. You could just.
Yeah, I mean, just to linger on that for just a second, like the idea that a kid used a knife on you in a fight
Mhm.
is is something that would traumatize me for life if that had happened to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, and it is pretty remarkable, like the way Ben is just like, oh man, my mom's gonna be so mad that I got blood on my clothes, and it's like, dude, come on,
So,
man, yeah.
is that, I guess, pushing against like realism there, or you just? Or
No,
I'm
I don't think
curious,
so.
like.
No, I'm more commenting. I can't even say. Maybe if this really does happen to a person in real life, they do take a very practical view of it. Maybe they're not traumatized by it. Trauma usually happens to a person when they feel like they're out of control. And if you successfully fought back against something like this, then maybe you would feel an increased sense of control. It's very hard to predict, right? It really depends on the
Mhm.
situation, depends on the person, depends on it's unpredictable. So I don't think it's entirely unrealistic that Ben would react this way. Plus, we have to consider that he has this really meaningful encounter in the next chapter that I think you could fairly say that would sort of recontextualize this violent episode, because it's like, well, the violent episode led to him meeting these really cool guys. So how bad can he
Yeah.
really feel? He got to be like, he's made his first friends. Um, I think it's really interesting actually that King juxtaposes this, you know, uh, the, what would be the worst experience of most people's lives with, oh, and then that led to him meeting his
Yeah.
friends, you know.
It brought him to the first friends he ever had. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, great point. I also I'm really into this. I kind of keep circling back on this idea of um him looking at Belch and Victor Chris and going like, it's as worse as he thought it was. And this idea that perhaps part of the reason why Ben, at least Ben at this moment, is processing all of this in a way that to you would cause you great trauma, and seems to be doing okay, is because this is kind of just aligning with the world as he thinks it is. You know,
Mhm.
like kids have a great imagination and great ability to imagine. And we'll see this, you know, specifically in Bill's chapter. They talk about his imagination. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But this idea that like to a child the world is like this scary unknown place, and in it bullies are capable of doing anything. Yes, a bully to a child, a bully will try to murder you, and so this is just aligning with his view of the world. And I think we kind of see this more with his first encounter with Pennywise, right? Like, is this thing that if you saw a fucking monster clown that turned into a mummy, that would also probably be a thing that would traumatize you for a long, long time. But to him, this is a world with monsters in it, and so it's this is just a thing that's aligning to that expectation of what the world is, because that's a childhood view of the world, is a
Yeah.
world that in which monsters exist.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think King usually portrays children as just being really resilient, and I think they are. I think they are really
Yeah.
resilient. I mean, I just think about how like my kids will like both physically and mentally, but like physically they'll like wipe out on their bike, and I would be, you know, in the hospital and they're just like, ow, cry for 5 seconds and then it's over
Uh-huh.
and then they're back to playing.
Yeah.
And they live in a world where it's like the faster I can get over this and get past the consequences, the better I can get on with my life. That is a very childlike attitude, and I do think it's realistic actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ben, while waiting to make sure the coast is clear, drifts off in his little hidey hole, and the rest of this chapter is him recalling the events of January that he referenced before. We see that Ben stays late after school to help his teacher on a cold, cold night and ends up having to walk home alone. I love this little bit about how Ben loves his teacher, Matt, and I think this is a perfect kind of way to start to show who Ben is. He looked down at his shoes. He loved her a little, not with the frank, unquestioning love he had lavished on Miss Thibodeau, his first grade teacher, but he did love her. I think this is great sentence construction, because I don't know about you, but like as I read this for the first time, I kind of filled in the blank and was surprised by the outcome, right? Like he loved her a little, not with the frank, unquestioning love he had lavished on. And I kind of assumed he was going to say Bev there.
Uh-huh.
But no, it's his first grade teacher. And so like what we're doing here is building this image of a character who just kind of loves everyone, or maybe more accurate to say every woman that he comes
Uh-huh.
in contact with, that is just like the type of child that is like, you know, I think people would charmingly call him a romantic, like, oh, you're just a little romantic, but he just like loves passionately everyone he comes in contact with, or every woman he comes in contact with, that is even somewhat a little bit nice to him.
Mhm.
um and I just find this adorable, and by the way, extremely relatable.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I
That's
was gonna say, me too. I think you'd also call a kid like him sweet, which also
yes.
goes in with the way that he is, like, very polite and considerate. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
these are all the qualities of a very sweet boy.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I agree.
Mhm.
I also really liked this moment when another kind of moment where we're kind of signaling Ben's impending adulthood, pushing against his childhood. He's kind of watching as his teacher is looking out the single window, noticing it's too dark outside, and saying that she's taken him, or she's kept him here too long. And it says Miss Douglas looked a little reassured, and then she glanced toward the window again. It just looks so cold out there, she said. So inimical. He didn't know the word, but he knew exactly what she meant. Something just happened. What? He had seen her, he realized suddenly, as a person instead of just a teacher. That was what had happened. Suddenly he had seen her face in an entirely different way, and because he did, it became a new face. The face of a tired poet. He could see her going home with her husband, sitting beside him in the car with her hands folded as the heater hissed and he talked about his day. He could see her making dinner. An odd thought crossed his mind. A cocktail party question rose to his lips. Do you have children, Mrs. Douglas? I love this so much. It's such a perfect way to demonstrate this oncoming rush of adulthood that you can reason out that teachers are not just teachers; they're people as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love just the writing cleverness of calling it a cocktail party question as a way
Yeah,
of adding the connotation that this is an adult sort of question, because
yeah,
cocktail
yeah,
party has the connotation of being adult. It's clever because he buries a connotation inside of a um, adjective, right? Like
yeah.
I just think that's very very fun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the other thing to notice about this is that she changes the subject. She doesn't answer the question that he asked,
Yeah,
which we don't know exactly what to assume, but we can assume something
I
bad,
would assume the
probably.
answer to the question is no.
Yeah.
Sadly, no to that
Yeah.
question.
Sadly, no, or maybe not anymore would be
Yeah.
the even sadder answer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember this experience basically because I
Yeah.
remember I remember having a teacher who I felt very similarly. I was probably 8, felt very similarly, I was probably at that point where I accidentally called this teacher mom, because yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot happens to a lot of kids, and then like one for some reason, I think this is when we were overseas and there just wasn't a very big social scene. For some reason, my parents like went over to her house, like me and my parents went over to, and my brother, our whole family went over to her house for like a social hangout with her and her husband and her kids.
Weird.
It was weird. It was very weird. I almost want to ask my parents like, what the hell was this? Because it is a really unusual thing to happen. But I guess when you live overseas, it's a very unusual life. So
Sure.
anyway, that was the thing where it's like she kind of was a whole different person to me after that, because it's like
Yeah,
you
I
have a
really
house.
like this idea
Yeah.
of like he will never be able to see her the same way again
Mhm.
now that he's
Right.
seen her this way.
Yeah.
Um, so I wonder what that's going to be like with my kids because my wife is a elementary school principal, and so I think my kids' experience with teachers is probably going to be a little bit different. I will say she teaches in a different school district than we live in, so like it's not like my my wife will know all the teachers, but
Uh-huh.
it will be different though. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Weird. Okay. It's gonna be some fun times.
Uh-huh.
So Ben walks home into the cold and on his way happens to turn and look down in the barrens, and that's where he sees him, Matt, for the first time since the first couple of chapters. We see the clown standing there holding a bunch of balloons that are not floating against the wind, or that are floating against the wind and floating towards Ben. And I love the line here. And when Ben observed that the balloons were floating in his direction, he felt unreality wash over him more strongly. So here he is, Matt. Here's Pennywise once again. Did you miss him? Did you miss him?
I miss this little dude. Uh, no, it's great. It's good to give a break from the tension, but then you bring it back. You keep.
Yeah,
I think I don't. I told you guys out there, I haven't watched these movies, so I don't really know how this all plays out. Like, are we gonna really do this slow burn where Pennywise is kind of popping up here and there? Or like, I don't know what the pacing of this book is. Maybe
sure.
another way of saying that. So every time we see Pennywise, it is a surprise to me. I'm not ready. I'm really very unprepared for this part of the book. I think I have more knowledge about like the ending,
Okay.
um, but and not even all that much. But I really kind of have no idea what to expect in this. And by this part of the book, I really mean like the bulk of the book, like the
Yeah.
entire beginning and middle.
And
So
you know what? Good.
yeah,
Good.
yeah, I'm glad. Yeah,
So Pennywise begins talking to Ben, similar to how he did Georgie. He says, "You'll float down here, Ben." And like Georgie before him, Ben seems almost under the spell of Pennywise. And this is something I wanted to talk to you about a little bit here, because you could say this is just literal magic, right? That Pennywise just is cast a magical spell and he's luring Ben in with this magical spell. But I also just kind of love this as like perhaps maybe even a little bit magic, but a little bit more just childhood and the lull of curiosity of something new and unexplained and unexplainable. Um, I love it as
Yeah.
more. I even like it as more that than just magic. That like Ben should even know better, but he can't help it, and it's not because Pennywise is a magician casting a spell, but just because maybe this is why he feeds on children, because he can lull them in just using their childhood against them.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of agnostic as to which of the two it is more of, but I like the idea that all of the stuff that makes the children resilient and imaginative and all the other qualities that we've talked about in this conversation, it also makes them naturally susceptible, not even requiring any kind of magical intervention.
Yeah, and I really liked what you talked about, with the idea of King and his love of mundane things kind of becoming magical through belief. Um, that this maybe doesn't even have to be specific magic, but because Ben buys into it, it has actual power around it.
Yeah, sure. I like that.
And the other thing I really like about this is because we spent so much of this chapter seeing Ben as a child on the cusp of adulthood. This conflict, this contact with Pennywise, um, it almost serves to be like a stop against that, right? Like his plan of attack against Ben, or his way of luring Ben in, is like, come float with us, come with me, and we can do kid things forever. You don't have to grow up, you don't have to deal with those adult things. It's not an accident, I think, that he mentions Peter Pan and Neverland here, right? It's not just because Ben is a reader that likes to read books, but that's a specific reference, it's a specific call out to stopping the aging process, stopping growing up. Come embrace the child side of you in the form of Pennywise. Run away from the adult side, run away from that adult stuff, come with the clown. I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking about how, now we've got two beats of Pennywise specifically saying something along the lines of like, come with me, you'll float,"
Mhm.
and now this idea of Peter Pan. And it does make me wonder, like, are we meant to take this literally? Like, is he harvesting the kids' souls or something? And then he's gonna hold on to their souls. It's not just like he kills them and eats them physically. It's
Mhm.
like he's keeping some vestige of them permanently with him in a paralyzed, petrified state. Um, and so we should take him more literally when he says, Come down here with me,
Yeah.
and we'll all float together." I don't have any real evidence for that. It's just kind of the way he talks about it. It's somewhat consistent, and I wonder if there's not something more there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Like the death of Georgie, I think, is a great kind of case study in this idea, right? Because he didn't take Georgie.
Uh-huh.
He didn't eat Georgie.
Yeah.
He ripped off Georgie's arm and then left,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
And
what's he getting out of this?
yeah, and with the other victim, he kind of mauled him, I guess you could say, but then
Mhm.
they still recovered the body. So yeah, I mean, I you know I don't know what he's getting out of it, right? I mean, I think he might be a creature that enjoys, or in some sense feeds on the fear, but it's like, okay, then why do you have to kill him? Like in all seriousness, if I was a vampire, I would feed without killing, because then your food supply stays around longer, right?
Yeah.
Like
What you should
this
do is construct some sort of elaborate door system in which you
yeah,
can enter the child's bedroom every night
yeah,
and feed
yeah.
on his fear and
Feed on
then
his
leave.
fear for as long as you can get away with it,
Yeah.
while his dad refuses to do anything about it. Yeah, yeah,
I just
exactly.
described the plot of Monsters Inc. I hope you realize that.
Oh, I thought we were describing the plot of the Boogeyman, but now that I've mentally connected the Boogeyman and Monsters Inc., I am very happy because now there's going to be some art that's going to come out of this.
I'm sure there already is, but yeah.
All right.
But Ben we see is saved by the bell, Matt, as the Derry Town Hall clock strikes 5 and causes our clown friend to look up in surprise. In that moment, Ben sees his face, and he sees not a clown, but the mummy. Not just the mummy, not just a mummy, but the mummy from Boris Karloff's Universal Pictures movie, The Mummy. And in that moment, the spell, or whatever you want to call it, is broken. He flees from Pennywise. He's convinced that the mummy clown is right behind him, going to grab him at any moment. But Pennywise doesn't follow, and Ben manages to escape this encounter, so he does not become one of the children killed by Pennywise.
Yep. Well, that's good. So, he's
great commentary.
Once again, Ben is walking over the water, right, on a bridge. So
yeah.
This is an important, I think we all get it. I'm just going to keep remarking upon it anyway, because you can't stop me.
Okay.
Well, I guess the part that's worth remarking on is that basically Pennywise is going to get him. And then as soon as he's off the bridge, it's like he's safe. So you're like Pennywise is, at least for now, he's like limited to being close to the water. I don't know if that'll always be true. Maybe he gets stronger as the season goes on or something like that. But for now, it seems like he can't leave the water.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So Ben wakes up from his nightmare, climbs out of his hidey hole, and he's sure that the damn kids he overheard have left. But as he stumbles his way into the clearing, he sees them both. He sees Bill and Eddie is having an asthma attack, and his inhaler is empty. And that's where we leave chapter 4 behind.
Yes.
And from there, we move right into chapter 5. Bill Denbrough beats the devil 1. As with Ben, we begin the next chapter with Bill back in 1985. And as with Ben, Bill is on a plane heading back to Derry and slowly remembering his childhood. And once again, King speaks through Bill, speaks to us through Bill, rather, because he's talking about that one question he as an author always gets. That question, of course, was, where do you get your ideas? It was a question Bill supposed all writers of fiction had to answer, or pretend to answer, at least twice a week. But a fellow like him who made a living by writing things which never were and never could be had to answer it, or pretend to, much more often than that. There was a pipeline, all right, but it wasn't either the Freudian or Jungian version of the subconsciousness that came out of. No interior drain system of the mind, no subterranean cavern full of Morlocks waiting to happen. There was nothing at the other end of the pipe but Derry, just Derry. And he's thinking about something in Derry, but his mind blocks what I think is supposed to be Pennywise from him a little bit there.
That felt right. I agree with that. And also, of course, this is King telling us that whenever he answers this interview question, it's bullshit. The real answer is that his ideas come from his shitty hometown and his traumatic childhood.
That's it. That's all of it. It's Derry. It always was Derry. It's Bangor. It's that.
Bangor.
That's what it all is.
I mean, that's like the answer is it's Bangor. Bangor is the answer. That's Can't wait to go see this nightmare place that
it's a beautiful town. It's an absolute beautiful town.
On the surface, it's a beautiful town.
So Bill, still in 1985, reminisces about purchasing Silver, a massively too big for him bike that he spends the summer, quote, courting death with. And I think we need to talk about Silver a little bit here, Matt. This is like a totemic object in Bill's life that can seemingly beat the devil, we're told. We'll see. It eventually will do just that as Bill kind of gestures towards the time that it saved them from that damned house on Nebolt Street, something we haven't actually got to experience yet, but priming us for it coming up. So what do you think about Silver as this totemic, all-important object in young Bill's life?
Well, I love it for two reasons. It's wonderfully visceral and it's wonderfully metaphorical. So first, visceral. My sphincters always clench whenever I see a kid barreling down the road on a scooter or a bike that they don't have control over. Maybe they're just not skilled. Maybe it's too big for them. Maybe they're just not wearing a helmet or something. very visceral experience to just imagine this kid on this bike that he can't handle. And so it's a powerful image. And then also it's a great symbol, it's a great metaphor of a child desperately wanting to be bigger, to be more powerful, to be grown up, to have some
Yeah.
kind of control and power in their world, and not having it, evidently not having it because the bike is clearly too big.
Yeah. Yeah, he wants to race away from childhood in some ways, wants to
Mhm.
race away from these feelings, and we see is doing just that throughout these chapters. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really fascinating. Like, I think we see the bike costs $25,
Mhm.
which that's a lot of money actually.
Yeah,
Uh, let's do a quick inflation check here.
sure.
Um, I should have done this before we started the podcast. That would have been good audio. It's 250 bucks. 250
Yeah,
bucks. That's a lot of money for an 11-year-old kid to save up for
yeah.
something.
I think that would have basically been all of my money,
Yeah.
at any given point in that period of my life.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and so it's this thing that becomes incredibly important. And as we've spoken again and again to this week about the idea of magic and the idea of is this bike, is this a magical bike? Well, I mean, not exactly, but it becomes something important and magical. It becomes super the fastest bike ever. Why is this bike so much faster than all the other bikes? Well, I mean, it's bigger, but it's also it has been being fueled by Bill's belief in
yeah,
it as this all important thing.
yeah. It'll be interesting as we go to see whether, since this is a story with magic, um, is this going to become a bike that becomes literally a magic bike at some point? And we'll see.
Man, it beats the devil.
Beats the devil. I guess you're right. I guess it's maybe it's like the Christine of bicycles.
um, so it's on the back of Silver. I'm never gonna be able to look at this fucking bike the same way again. Thanks, man. It's on the back of Silver that we're transported back into 1958 as Bill races to the drugstore to get a refill on Eddie's aspirator. The text jumps a little bit back from here. We kind of start in media res and then jumps back. We get to see the conflict between Eddie, Bill, and the bullies from their perspective instead of just hearing it from Ben's perspective. I love Bill's kind of matter of factness about the bullies and how to deal with them, right? This idea that this is just life and you have to deal with these people. And Eddie got punched today, and Bill just says matter of factly, Eddie forgot the rules, so they creamed him. And it was just this is just how things work in this world,
Yeah.
We have no power, they have the power over us, and this is all we can do.
Yeah, them's the rules, right? It's this
Yeah.
very impersonal sense of what just happened to them.
Yeah. One thing pointing out here as we get further and further into Bill's chapter and Bill's point of view here is how Georgie's death just rules every bit of these pages. Like we talked about before, if Ben's chapter is one about a child on the cusp of adulthood grappling with feelings of love and maybe even loneliness that he's not fully ready to understand, Bill's is certainly that same thing with the concept of grief. And as we'll see, it's a grief that he's kind of forced to deal with all by himself, all alone. I love here, like we see exactly that, like his worry about Eddie's safety as Eddie is having this asthma attack transforms into thinking about the death of Georgie, right? Like he's saying unconscious and then we had a parenthetical, don't shit, please don't think like that, or even dead. His mind insisted implacably, like Georgie, dead like Georgie. And so it's just like it's there, right? It's always there. It's every moment of his day. The death of Georgie is threatening to burst its way into his brain.
Yeah.
It's really really powerful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was upset by Georgie's death back in the first chapter, but there was kind of a lot going on. Uh, I was a lot more emotionally affected by this, and then the later bits, obviously, when Bill is thinking more about Georgie.
Yeah,
This chapter really actually made me tear up, and I imagine we'll get some more of that stuff as we go.
I agree. I totally agree. Um, it's brutal. It really is brutal. And it's really interesting because it does, as you kind of alluded to earlier, make the perfect contrast with the Ben chapter, which is Ben has his issues, he has his problems, but like we started off that chapter with so much hope, so much like happiness, like school's out for the summer, hell yeah, like we've got the whole summer ahead of us. And as we've moved through it, it's just we shifted to a person who is going through something much worse, something much darker, and the tone has shifted with him. It is kind of remarkable how these two chapters are written differently.
Yeah, I agree. I was noticing. I mean, we talked about this at the beginning of this conversation, but the difference in feeling and tone and in voice between
Hmm.
these two, and it's not
Yeah,
extreme. Like it's not like King is using like weird affectations in the prose itself, but it's a very different feeling, very different vibe
yeah.
between the two.
And especially since like these chapters are not necessarily strictly aligning to the like one chapter per point of view structure, right? Like in this chapter we jump back and forth between Bill and Ben's perspective a little bit here, but the tone of the chapter still aligns with, you know, those moments of this is kind of the Bill chapter, quote unquote, and the tone of it matches what Bill's going through.
Yeah, I agree.
So Bill is torn between riding for help and leaving Eddie all alone. And fortunately for him, Ben arrives right at this time to solve this problem. And so Bill takes off. And man, the writing here as he gets Silver up to speed and starts weaving through traffic is just wonderful. Like I really love that King chooses to echo this idea of like, if you'd ask Ben if he's lonely, he'd look at you shocked. And equally, if you asked Bill if he has a death wish, he'd look at you equally as shocked. But like watching him like narrowly skate through traffic is just kind of horrifying. You have to be forced to say, "Oh yeah, this kid doesn't even realize it, but he's trying to kill himself a little bit."
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for somebody who's this preoccupied with death, he has no fear of death. In fact, I think he's, you know, it's what you just said. He's so depressed, so sad, so lost, um, that he just doesn't care if he lives or dies.
Yeah, maybe it was too strong of a thing to specifically say like he's trying to kill himself. I don't think it's that. It's just he's indifferent
Hmm.
towards death and pushing the line. Um, as we see
Yeah,
here, is like one of the only things that allows him to forget his problems.
yeah. I think I might say like right now where he is in his life, life is meaningless to him.
Mhm.
He just doesn't care. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I'd frame it.
I really love this writing as a kind of reflection of that. It was all behind him now. His stutter, his dad's blank hurt eyes as he puttered around his garage workshop, the terrible sight of the dust on the closed piano cover upstairs, dusty because his mother didn't play anymore. The last time had been at Georgie's funeral, 3 Methodist hymns. George going out in the rain, wearing his yellow slicker, carrying the newspaper boat with its glaze of paraffin. Mr. Gardner coming up the street 20 minutes later with his body wrapped in a bloodstained quilt, his mother's agonized shriek, all behind him. He was the Lone Ranger. He was John Wayne. He was Bo Diddley. He was anybody he wanted to be, and nobody who cried and got scared and wanted his mother. Man, that's just wonderful, right? Like
Yeah.
it's this interesting thing where, again, I think we're doing this thing where I don't know if I'm convinced that this is actually Bill's thought process as he does this, right? Like, I don't know if he's actively thinking that it was all behind him now. Like, this feels to me like the narrator, or as like you said, elderly Bill's injection on this scene. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, yeah, I don't know exactly like so what this brought out to me was more of what we were talking about a minute ago, where there's not a minute ago, a bit ago, where it's like the stuff going on in your head ramps up continuously from, age 10 through age 15 or so,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even
Mm-hmm.
further. And like the 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 struggle with your own mind becomes something that at least I became concerned with, became um it was a struggle. It's not something that gets talked about much, so I always kind of wondered if I was just a weirdo for for struggling with the amount of sort of mental content that I had to deal with, where it's like, um I did feel like I was thinking too much, the way that the way that Bill considers here, and I don't know. I guess I'll just ask. I'll put it to you. Like, did you experience what I'm talking about here, or am I indeed a weirdo?
I mean, yes and no. I think it's really interesting to me that like in this moment, Bill starts by saying, "Bill, you're thinking too much," and then kind of changes that. No, the problem is actually he's imagining too much,
Hmm.
which strikes me as a very specific like authorly thing. Like Bill is an author, and so it's not just thinking; it's imagining, it's creating um, ideas and thoughts. I mean, to be honest with you, don't have a distinct memory in my life of like being the type of person who was thinking too much about things. Um, but I mean, I think that was probably true about me. I don't know. Like I, I, I thought a lot. I think a lot. um,
Yeah.
I think about life and what I want it to be and things happening and not happening. Like I feel like my adult life is kind of filled with me constantly entertaining myself in ways that drown out that kind of thinking. Like these days, I really am listening to podcasts or books or something kind of constantly. Um, and so it kind of drowns out that kind of thing. But that wasn't the case for young me. So I don't know. I don't, and I'm not sure what I like think about like the idea of like how does that relate to growing up? Is that something I guess adults do more than children? I don't know.
Yeah. Um, this is part of my midlife crisis is what you just described, where I used to constantly be basically concocting stories in my mind, and I would write a lot more as a consequence. I would
Mhm.
concoct stories whenever I wasn't doing anything else, and then in the time when I could actually put pen to paper, I would like catch up with wherever I had gone in my head. And this was the case starting at probably age 12, probably not 11, maybe starting age 11, maybe starting in 6th grade, maybe starting earlier now that I think about it. Anyway, point is that was my mode of like channeling my mental energy, and now I don't do that anymore because I'm always drowning it out, as you said so eloquently, which is just so sad when you really think about it, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and it makes me want to stop doing that just for that reason, just so I can sort of hear that voice of the turtle coming over the psychic airwaves again. But I kind of lost the plot of how this was connected to what we were talking about in the story. This was an interesting little digression, anyway. Yeah, too much thinking. I guess I do strongly relate to Bill in this way, actually. Like
Mhm.
especially at like I am sort of a, what's the phrase, a temporarily embarrassed famous novelist, in the sense that I've never written a novel, and I'm not famous. Um, but I always, when I was a kid, I always figured I would be a writer, actually. So there's some more, senses in which I am reflecting on my past and realizing what a failure I am, after my 20-year reunion. So
Oh my
um,
gosh.
there's a lot in here. There's a lot in this episode for you folks to
N-
to know about me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is something uniquely Bill in how he's experiencing this kind of thing, right? Like the idea of he's a storyteller, he creates stories and creates worlds, and so he kind of internalizes everything he sees through the lens of imagining that, and that is, I guess, perhaps making this experience worse for him in some ways. I think we'll see a little bit later in the chapter. Perhaps there's a way that could be providing him an out for this kind of thing as well. But I love this idea of like, to me the idea of thinking versus imagining is uh, the difference. Perhaps the best way to describe this is the difference between Ben and Bill, right? Where I think Ben is a thinker, Bill is an imaginer.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that.
All right. So Bill makes it into the pharmacy and gets Eddie's inhaler refilled by Mr. Keen, the pharmacist, who is such a nice guy. He's such a nice guy. He
Yeah.
sells this medicine to Eddie's mom for cheap. It's so cheap. It's only a couple bucks. And that's because we learn that it's actually just tap water. It's just good old H2O.
Uh-huh.
And Matt, I swear to God, this is one of those things that, like, between last week and this week, last week the word psychosomatic used, and then this week we get textual support that Eddie does not have asthma and his inhaler is nothing. I swear I thought this happened much later in the novel than it did, and I was utterly shocked to see it this early. Really to the point where like I almost like I think if you listen back to last week's episode, you see like I almost say that the inhaler is bogus, and I stopped myself because I was like, oh, surely that's the thing that's revealed much later in the book. It was like, no, just a week later. But I mean, when you look at it though, it does seem pretty obvious, like the next leap of if we've established that Eddie's mom is treating illnesses that he doesn't have, then the asthma seems like the logical leap from that.
Yeah, I guess I might have thought, okay, well, surely at least one of his medical symptoms is real, and this is what instigated his mom's overall hypochondria regarding him. But it's like, nope,
Right.
literally. I mean, he does actually have psychosomatic asthma, like
Yeah.
which to be precise, a psychosomatic illness still entails a lot of suffering for the person. But this is at least not just his mom projecting. This is actually causing him suffering, but he has internalized it. Um,
Hmm.
I did think it was funny that it was tap water, not even distilled water. It's just tap
Yeah.
water.
Fucking
Anything could be in
asshole.
that. Um,
Yeah. What a jerk. And like he still charges for it.
uh-huh.
Like, oh, Mr. Keen, you suck.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The guy is just such a tender-hearted fella.
Yeah. So on his way back, Bill has to ride much slower, and that means he can't outrun his thoughts, and so he's forced to think about his brother's murder and the murder of the other children after him. Bill thinks they're all connected, and he isn't even sure the murderer is a person. And then we get this. The voices that sometimes seem to speak in his head now, whispering to him, and surely they were not variations of his own voice, for these voices did not stutter. They were quiet, but they were sure, advising him to do certain things, but no, not others. Was it those things which made Derry seem somehow different now, somehow threatening, with unexplored streets that did not invite, but some seemed instead to yawn in a kind of ominous silence that made some faces look secret and frightened? So, Matt, what are these voices in Bill's head?
It's the turtle. Well,
That's
okay, it could be the turtle,
okay.
but it could also just be. We talked in Ben's chapter about this idea that there's a kind of adult voice that is starting to
Hmm.
creep into their minds, and this is a
Yeah,
sign that this is how you grow up: is you have childish thoughts, and then every once in a while, this more worldly thought will slip in, and you'll kind of be like, "Where is that? Where'd that come from?"
yeah,
And that could be all this is.
yeah. The idea that you're seeing Derry as a place of threat now because you've grown old enough and experienced enough through your brother's death to realize that the world is a scary place, and not perhaps scary in the way you thought, but also perhaps scary in the way you thought. Like I think there's one thing that it said in Ben's chapter we didn't actually talk about, was the idea that like as he's kind of working on processing through the fact that he just saw a clown sitting on ice with balloons floating the wrong way, he's like, no, those monsters are not for here outside. They're for when you're in bed and scared, right?
Right.
That's where that kind of thought belongs, is for we're sitting in bed scared. And it seems like Bill's experience, if we want to not make this magical and just make this more specific to him, and the voices, that his adulthood is painting a new picture of the world, a picture in which adults are secret and frightened, and the streets are not safe, and
Yeah.
the world is not what you thought it was.
Yeah. Well,
And I love it.
another contrast to draw between these two characters, by the way, is simply that Bill's narration feels more grown up than Ben's, and a lot of that
Yeah, it
has to
does.
do with
Hmm.
this exact thing. Where for Ben, the idea of a really scary thing happening, it's easy to push out of his mind into the realm of that was a fantasy. That didn't really happen. That doesn't belong in
Hmm.
the world. So I'm just going to kind of brush it all off. I'm kind of gonna put it in a box and not think about it. For Bill, the world is a place where horrible things can happen. Horrible things can happen for no reason,
Hmm.
suddenly out of nowhere. Seeing a scary clown is not the worst thing that has happened to Bill recently.
Uh-huh.
So, and that has caused him to mature in a lot of ways, and to for very realistic reasons, see the world as a more dangerous place because
Yeah.
this horrible thing has happened to him.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
So Bill gets back, and Eddie is okay, Matt. The tap water magically clears away his asthma. We learned that the attack itself, the asthma attack that is, didn't actually start when the bully showed up, or even when Eddie got punched in the nose. But the text tells us it started after they left, when Eddie saw the blood on his shirt and realized that his mom would be making him go to the emergency room, which again
Uh-huh.
is reinforcing this idea that it's just completely psychosomatic, that the asthma is triggered by his relationship with his mother and the idea that his mother is constantly worried about his health.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and wait to see. I can't wait to see how that unfolds narratively.
Yeah, I mean, it's the cool thing. We talked about the idea that I was shocked that this was revealed so early in the novel, but really, honestly, it's revealed to us, the reader. Eddie has not understood this yet. We see adult Eddie has barely begun to really understand this, and so the question is, as adult Eddie is remembering child Eddie's life, what he thinks of this, like what he like we kind of see through Eddie's flashbacks that the truth of the matter, the truth of who he is and what he liked to do, was something that maybe he was aware of, but not really. And so the real interesting stuff is going to be like what child Eddie thinks about his asthma and thinks about these things, and how much of it is he truly aware of and how much he isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I have a question for you here, Matt. I think this is the place to do it too. Now that we've gotten the scene where the three of our friend group have finally met and have started bonding with each other, I have to ask how the audiobook is doing with Bill's stutter. Because it's everywhere in these pages, right? Every sentence he's stuttering over multiple words, and that is kind of in line what we were told about him, that post Georgie, the stutter has really gotten bad. And I don't want to say this like I'm disparaging people who suffer from stuttering, because I know it's a frustrating, serious thing that a lot of people go through. But I'm curious how it feels to listen to Bill trip over his words, rather than just read it.
It's I don't know. I mean, it feels authentic. It feels like it's just part of the story. It doesn't feel like
Hmm.
it's a some kind of put on. The voice actor doesn't hold back from it.
Hmm.
Um, and as a kid who stuttered pretty badly myself for a period of time, funnily enough, probably worst in literally when I was 10 or 11. Though I don't think as pathologically as Bill does, but definitely it was a thing I struggled with for a period of time.
Sure.
I haven't been offended by anything about it. I mean, I don't know. I've never really been offended by by anything in that vicinity. It's just like it's a
Yeah.
problem that people have, and it sucks. And I think most people find a way to deal with it. I think my way was actually exactly the way that Bill dealt with it, which was that I just started speaking more slowly, and then adjusted, and then basically, I mean, I still stutter sometimes on the you hear me do it. But it's anyway, it's not distracting. It's just part of the experience, I think, of this book, and it feels authentic to the character, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I was asking like from a defense standpoint. I guess the thing that I'm curious about is like when I'm reading, I can just kind of skip or glance over Bill's stutter. Like, like your eyes can just go over it quickly and you're not really experiencing the feeling of listening to someone stutter through dialogue. Whereas I feel like in an audiobook format, this might be one of the rare cases where the audiobook functions better here,
Yeah,
because you're kind of forced to relive the experience of his frustration, and also the frustration that can come from trying to have a conversation with a person like that.
that's exactly the case. I think that you're empathizing with the character's frustration as you're listening to him struggle his way through these
Hmm.
sentences. That's
Yeah.
totally true. Yeah.
My stupid brain and eyes can just kind of really flit over them really quickly, and not have to go through that pain and frustration
Yeah. Right. I
beat to
mean,
beat,
there's
second to second.
yeah, the audiobooks and listening to people read out loud, it enforces a sense of time onto the reading experience that is just not
Hmm.
present when you're reading with your eyes, because you can your eyes are actually skipping around more than you even realize when you read.
Yeah.
And so it it really messes with the sense of how long a thing takes. There's kind of no way around that. That's just the way your
Yep.
brain reads.
Yep. And so the three of them kind of almost instantly bond, Matt. And I really this is such a heartbreaking line here. He liked the way his laughter sounded with theirs. It was a sound he had never heard before. Not mingled laughter. He had heard that lots of times, but mingled laughter of which his own was a part. It's so sad. But
Yeah.
and yet you're so happy for him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad, but it's beautiful because it's the beginning of this friendship that
Yeah.
is what this book is going to be about, is
Mhm.
the sense that I get anyway.
And the really cool thing I like about this is like the way these children bond is really fascinating to me because like there's this moment where Bill just kind of casually invites Ben to come play with him tomorrow. And like I think it says specifically that Ben is shocked by the casualness of it, that like in his experience no one would ever do this, especially to someone like him. And then in turn Ben kind of, as they're talking about the dam, just kind of casually explains how to correctly build a dam, like as if it was nothing. And they're like totally shocked by the, well, how do you know it'll work? And he's like, because I mean, I don't know, look at it. It's going to work.
Yeah.
And then there's also the bit where Ben like comes up with this great plan of how to avoid Eddie's mother seeing the blood by just getting chocolate milk and pouring it over the blood. And then you can't tell the difference between the two. Um, it's this really fun thing where you kind of see how they all provide value to the group and everything, and they shock each other in turn. Like Ben is shocked by Bill's casual friendliness, and Bill is shocked by Ben's casual intelligence. It's just, I don't know. I really just liked seeing these three kids interact together.
Yeah. Well, especially after all the horribleness of the previous parts. Yeah,
Hmm.
it makes
Hmm.
you so happy. You're so happy this is finally happening because you've been wanting, and also you've known that it was building toward this for some time. So you're so happy to finally see it happen,
Yeah,
because
no, I agree.
the story very formally kind of foreshadowed, like, this is, you know, Ben remembered back when he had almost literally, fallen onto his, like it set this up, right?
Yeah.
We knew we were heading toward this, and now we're
Hmm.
finally here.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think they plan to come back tomorrow and begin work on the dam that they're going to rebuild with Ben's help.
The dam, yeah. So I think it's really cool, actually, that going with my totally original and amazing theory that Pennywise is associated with the waterways and with the water system in some way. The first thing that they are doing together is they're building a dam, something that blocks off water flow. Um, is this going to be plot relevant, or is this just a symbol? I don't really. I think it works great as a cool symbol, as just a little nod of the
Mhm.
head toward the idea that, like, this is their mission, this is their purpose as a group, is to stop the flow of evil. Metaphorically speaking.
I like that. I like that a whole bunch. That's a very astute observation there. It's that's a lot of fun.
Cool.
So the kids split up with the promise to see each other tomorrow, and we follow Bill back to his house. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but Bill's home life is just absolutely heartbreaking. I love the description of his mom and dad on separate ends of the couch, basically the ends of a sandwich or bookends, and like it used to have in the middle of it two children, and now those children are gone. All that's left in between them is this ghost kid. Like it's tough to blame these people. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child. I cannot even imagine. But also, they've got this one kid left, and they are not helping him at all. They're unable to get through their grief, so how could they even begin to help a child get through his? And thus, Bill, an 11-year-old boy, is kind of forced to navigate all this grief by himself, and he barely understands it. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get any of it, and he's having to find his way through it, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. I got nothing really to add there, other than that this part really got to me.
Hmm.
All this stuff, it was very poignant. I was tearing up a lot. I'm
Yeah.
just pushed all my buttons there. It was great.
The line that really spoke to me and I think hurt me the most is when Bill thinks to himself, "Why are they crying so far apart?" Right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's his father is like downstairs in his garage crying, and his mother is in the other room crying, and this idea that like why aren't you suffering together? Why aren't we suffering together? Why are we so far apart? And he just doesn't get it. Doesn't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, tough stuff. So Bill goes into Georgie's room, vaguely discussing something horrible that happened in here back in September or December that we'll see about in a bit. But I love this. I love the God. There's so many good moments of these chapters, Matt. I keep wanting to say this is my favorite part, but this is my favorite part right here. And one surprisingly odd thing. There were times when he felt he loved Georgie best in his fear, because even in his fear, his uneasy feelings that a zombie George might be lurking in the closet or under the bed, he could remember loving George better in here, and George loving him. In his effort to reconcile these two emotions, his love and his terror, Bill felt that he was the closest to finding where final acceptance lay. These were not things of which he could have spoken. To his mind, the ideas were nothing but an incoherent jumble. But his warm and desiring heart understood, and that was all that mattered. It's beautiful. Like
Yeah.
just how Stephen, how do you do this? How do you do this?
Yeah. It's a really interesting approach to writing a character perspective
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's interestingly explicit. It's like the author is saying, this is what this character this is what's going on with this character. This is where this character is headed. But the character is not aware of this. The character
Yeah.
is a 10-year-old. They can't really process things at this level. They don't really know the things that I'm telling you, but nonetheless, this is an accurate description of what's happening in their head.
Yeah.
I like it's just interesting and I don't know if it's like totally unique, but it just strikes me as a very interesting approach he's taken to how he writes these child characters in this book.
Yeah, I mean, and it also tracks with these other things we've seen, like his love and his terror, right? Like riding Silver, the line he's skirting with fear of death, while also love of the moment and the experience. Like, and it also, I think you're right, kind of helps maybe lay the path forward, like encountering with Penny, like Pennywise is terrifying, right? And perhaps what is driving Bill through whatever future encounters he have, whether it be whatever happens in Neibolt Street, or what happens in the future, is this idea that the way through his grief is in this weird mixture of love and terror, that perhaps only Pennywise can provide him.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very cool, very beautiful notion as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the chapter ends with Bill looking through Georgie's photo album, and we begin to feel the tension in the air increase. Something, Matt, happened here in December. Something with this album. Something that scared the crap out of Bill the last time. Something that he needs to determine if it was real or not. And we get this. He looked at the picture fixedly for some time and was about to close the book when what happened in December happened again. George's eyes rolled in the picture. They turned up to meet Bill's own. George's artificial say cheese smile turned into a horrid leer. His right eye drooped, closed in a wink. See you soon, Bill. In my closet. Maybe tonight. Bill throws the book across the room as blood begins to ooze out of it, and that's where our chapter ends. Oh, so deliciously creepy, isn't it? I just like King doesn't scare me often, but this moment always scares me a little bit. Just like the horrid leer, the fact that it's perfectly set up to Bill. One of the most horrifying things is that his little brother could turn into a monster, and having that very thing happen, at least in the photo album here. Oh, I love it. I'm getting chills
Yeah.
now just thinking about it.
No, it's beautiful, and what I love about the flavor of scary that it is that it's not a monster lunging at him. It's not something physically. It's not physical fear. It's
Yeah.
the creepiness of a picture. It's just a picture, you know.
Hmm.
It's just a really creepy picture. That's what is so great about it. That's I think the best of King's sort of ability to tap into what is deeply creepy in ways that you might not have ever thought of before.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like the modern horror version of this would definitely have like George reach out of the book and try to grab him, and we get
Mhm.
a wonderful jump scare moment. Um, but no, this is just simple and disturbing, and like great, great. I think it is really interesting that like in this moment, George, the first day of summer, the day we have him, he decides for the first time in 6 months to go back in the room and say, today I need to face this thing that I thought I saw back in December. Um, like we don't really see why,
Yeah.
outside of just we know he goes into Georgie's room because of this mixture of fear and love that the closest he's going to get to working through his grief is by doing this, but we don't really understand why in this moment he gets back from the Barrens and says, today this is what I'm doing. I'm going to pick up that book again. I'm going to see if it happens again.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe he gained some kind of strength from his saving of Eddie.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe, and maybe we will find out next week, because that is it for this week. We have finished those 2 chapters, 2 just absolutely wonderful chapters. I love this book. I'm glad you seem to be loving it too, Matt.
Absolutely, yes. This is so fun.
Oh God, it's only gonna get better. I'm gonna keep saying that until the book is over because it's only gonna get better.
Good.
So next week we are reading chapters 6 and 7, the next 2 chapters in the book. Matt, it's there's some stuff's gonna go down. Chapter 6 is a rough one, man. Get ready. Emotionally prepare yourself for chapter 6. That's all I'll tell you.
Yeah, I will say that I've sort of known the tenor that at least one of these characters chapters was going to have because it has to, right? So I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to go there. And if we know anything from what happened with the knife and the cutting of the tummy, King is gonna go there. We're not gonna skip over anything. So
yeah. Well, I don't want to spoil it. You'll see.
Okay. All right.
All right. So that will be next week, chapter 6 and 7. But before we wrap up the podcast, we need to do one more thing, and that is our discussion question from last week. Matt, will you please remind us what the question last week was?
What is your favorite use of a phone call as an inciting incident?
And I want to say here before we read the answers, like we got a lot of great responses to this question that we kind of said at the beginning was a not good question because we were out of it. Out of ideas rather. And one of our listeners said, hey, just ask the same questions again. It doesn't matter. You have new listeners all the time, and maybe people didn't get to answer it last time around. And you know what? That's a great point.
Yeah. We'll do that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do that. For sure.
Yeah, because at a certain point, it like begins to meaningfully cut into our prep time as we're like, what about this? No.
Yeah.
No,
we
stupid.
Spend way too long. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. Unplucked Gem says, "How about Taken?" Liam Neeson's response turns the typical ransom call on its head and sets you up for what you now know is going to be a revenge/vengeance flick. Yep. I'd say that's pretty close to being the inciting incident. You know what? I'm not going to nitpick at all. That's a perfect answer. Thank you.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, like. The thing about inciting incident as a term is it's technical, but also not technical.
Yeah.
Next, we have Aqua Lungfish, who says, like a few others have said, I'm having trouble thinking of any non-visual stories that involve a phone call, which is fine. People answer visual stories all the time. And someone already picked the best choice, Scream, which I think we'll see in a few of these answers, Matt. So I've got 2 slightly offbeat responses this week, both from TV shows. First, The West Wing. Specifically the story that kicks off at the end of season 2. While there are a lot of stories in the show that begin with phone calls, the call that the character Charlie gets about a specific character at the end of episode 19 at Potomac causes the president to make a drastic decision about whether he's going to run for re-election. The following episode is one of the best on any TV show, and the choices he makes in it lead not only to a great episode, but a great story for the following season. You can make the argument that it decides the direction of the rest of the show, but we'll just stick to the immediate results. The other show is The Haunting of Hill House. The show about a troubled family dealing with grief and the effects of time living in a haunted house is kicked off by the youngest child making a phone call to several family members. Each character that receives a call reacts differently, some ignoring it, some deciding she's blowing things out of proportion, but none actually helping her. Those decisions color how they act and feel through the rest of the show, several outright regretting not answering the phone. The family has to reconnect and attempt to reconcile their past and their behaviors towards each other, which leads them to discover what actually happened when they were children. Plus, spooky ghosts and an exceptionally shot 1-take episode. Okay, it's actually like 4 takes, but 4 and 45 minutes is still impressive.
Wow. Great.
Yeah. Great answer. I don't know. Matt, have you ever watched The West Wing?
Seen like one episode.
That's such a good show. That's so good. I love that show. At least the
Yeah.
seasons that why can't I remember his name?
You know what's
Sorkin,
funny?
Aaron Sorkin.
I just had his name in my brain, and then as soon as I saw that you were reaching for it, I lost it.
And of course, yeah, The Haunting of Hill House is a Mike Flanagan show that we will definitely be covering on Flan Slingers.
Yeah, flan slinging. Yeah. Okay. That's gonna be great when that happens. All right. Idolin Jones says, "What's your favorite scary movie?" Okay. Ideally, sorry. Okay, that's the Scream quote. I should have said
Yes.
it in a voice. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you fucked up big.
I fucked up. Technically, the whole murder of Drew Barrymore's Casey is the inciting incident to the original Scream, but the phone call from Ghostface was the inciting incident to the inciting incident, so it counts. It's an iconic way to start one of the best, in my opinion, the best horror movie franchises. Every Scream movie has a great opening, and unless my memory betrays me, they all feature a phone call as well. Outside of the first, my personal favorite is the opening to the newest entry, Scream 6. It starts with a phone call, as is tradition, but the scene develops into an interesting and unique twist in a series that follows a pretty standard, though endlessly entertaining, formula. This was a toughie, by the way. I can't think of many answers other than this and it, of course. Did The Big Chill open with the phone call? I've only seen the opening scene, and it was many years ago, but I believe it features "I heard it through the grapevine" as the phone call begins. I don't know.
I think of a lot of different things. I don't remember if The Big Chill opened with the phone call or not.
Yeah.
To continue the trend, Reads a Lot 92 has also picked the opening of Scream, which, not to put my finger on the scale, but I think is the best answer to this question. They say, I think Scream is going to be a popular answer to this question. I think it uses this trope in the franchise and throughout the genre. It plays a huge part of why millennials tend to keep their phones on silent and never answer phone calls from unknown numbers.
Is that why? Okay.
I think that's exactly why. Overall, I think the Scream franchise has done an excellent job in not only using their use of am I reading the same thing? And not only using their use of the phone calls being the inciting incident of multiple installments of the franchise, but also in using phone calls throughout each movie to maintain the air of mystery around each new killer. Each franchise has even kept up with the modern technology and incorporated FaceTime calls and various ways of cloning cell phones to keep you off the killer's track. Yeah, man. The OG Scream will always be the best inciting incident phone call thing to me. I love it so much. And I continue to like the new Scream movies. Did not love Scream 6 as much as I loved 5, though. A little disappointed in that one, but that's okay.
Maybe we can get him to make us watch Scream for Doofcast at some point, because I haven't seen it.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
Uh-huh.
The original Scream?
I haven't seen any Screams. Screamless.
Oh my god. Yeah, no, we gotta fix this. That's the most fucking ridiculous thing I've ever heard, actually.
Well, you know what you have to do.
Yep. Wait, me or the listeners?
Anybody. I look, I can't actually just go choose to watch a movie. So you have to go put it on the Doofcast voting ballot, and then as it get voted for, and then I'll watch it. Okay.
I just want to say that as runners of the show, we do have the power to just pick a movie we want to talk about.
Well, that's the other thing, is you could just say we're doing it, but
yeah.
I can't do that though.
I mean, you could though.
I could. Okay. We're going to do Scream next opportunity.
Not this week, but
next
soon.
Week?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Week after.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I can't believe I didn't know this about you. I'm very upset right now. How long have you been my friend?
I don't know. Approximately 20 years, actually. Slightly less than 20 years as of this summer.
Yeah, it'll be 20 years in August.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. Looking forward to that then. Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam says, I'm loving this. As I read through all the answers, they were the exact things that came to my mind. Taken, Scream, The Ring, Lost Highway, The Matrix. Hilarious. That leaves me to mention the famous "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy" phone call from the OG Elm Street. Bye-bye, Glenn. Watching Miss Nude USA in your cropped sports jersey. But my favorite is the call between Rod and Rose in Get Out, which I recently showed my son. It's such a good scene. She's so creepy, and he is losing his shit. But because of that call, he heads to the house and ultimately ends up rescuing his buddy from Rose and her wackadoo racist family. And my son loved that movie.
Okay, Matt. Nightmare on Elm Street.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen that one?
Is that the one with Freddy?
Yes.
Yeah, but it was so long ago that I don't really. I mean, I have seen it, but I just don't really remember it very well. So
You know what we should actually do? We should make October slasher month and just fucking fix you.
I guess. I mean, the thing is, I don't really like scary movies that much, but I guess there are certain of these classics that I just can't go through life without seeing. So
Yeah, I
maybe
mean,
it's not a
I'm
bad
not
idea.
saying like you have to watch all 6 Screams, all
Yeah,
7 Nightmare on Elm Streets, and all
right.
fucking 12
Yeah,
Friday the 13th, but like the first ones.
just the highlights. Sure.
We
Okay.
watched Halloween, right? You've seen Halloween.
I've seen
Didn't we
Halloween.
do it? Didn't we do an episode on that?
We did an episode on Halloween. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Well,
so,
that we got one check there. Okay.
yeah.
We'll
All right.
fix you. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
Okay.
It'll be
Great.
fine.
Great.
Next we have Burning Beard 138 who says Joel Schumacher's 2002 masterpiece Phone Booth. Obviously. I mean, it's like Speed, but in a phone booth. Much more exciting.
Great answer. You know, it's really funny that I've seen Phone Booth, but I haven't seen the classic horror film Scream.
Yeah, that's really hilarious, Matt.
It's really, really good.
I didn't hate Phone Booth.
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
It was fine.
I actually, I really like that actor,
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell. I think Colin Farrell's great. So
Yeah.
that's why I like the movie, basically.
Mhm.
Oh, and I also really like Kiefer Sutherland. So between those two, it was quite watchable.
Yeah.
All right. Hobo Demon says +1 to user Pear Jane's choice on The Matrix, which, sorry, Pear Jane, you were not selected. So you get some reflected glory here.
Oh, so the algorithm selected the person who said agree with other person, but not.
Yeah. The algorithm is
Excellent.
not very smart, but this is what we're left with. And then Hobo Demon goes on to say that outfit totally worked on its own and didn't have to plug into pre-existing appreciation for the works of H.R. Geiger, but it's cool that it did.
The reference here is to the opening scene with Trinity and the phone booth. Right? That's what Pear Jane's answer was, I was pretty sure.
Yeah.
Which is a great answer. I mean, when we did our Doofcast episode on The Matrix, I think we talked about the opening sequence for like 20 minutes on its own because it's like I think one of just the best opening sequences in movie history.
Yeah.
And it's got a phone in it and an important phone call.
Important phone call. The Matrix did win like the best movie we've ever covered contest over on
It did do
the
that.
Doofcast. That was a few.
We're gonna have to run that back now that we got more movies. I think it's still probably gonna win, but
I think it might still win, but it would be fun to run that again. Yeah.
Next we have Obi-Wan Martinez who says, for this week's question, a few oldies for the telephone call as plot catalyst. When a stranger calls, which many will remember, even if you've not seen the film, as this call is coming from inside the house movie, where a young Carol Kane is a terrified babysitter. War Games, where the old school dial-up modern modem connection used by a pre-Ferris Bueller Matthew Broderick in search of a tasty new 80s video game almost unwittingly unleashes a thermonuclear apocalypse. Hijinks ensue. Now, you've certainly heard the call is coming from inside the house story, right?
I heard the story. I wasn't aware that there was like a canonical film version of that.
So When a Stranger Calls is a 70s film. I feel like this was I feel like that's an urban legend.
Right.
And they've just made a movie on top of it.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Cool. I definitely heard the like campfire story version of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. M. Hellerart says, ring, ring, ring. 7 days. Maybe not the inciting incident of the whole film, but this phone call creates a sense of dread and gives the main character a ticking clock. If she doesn't solve the mystery of the videotape in time, she will meet her doom.
totally the inciting into the film, 100%.
Yeah, I'd count that because prior to that, it's not too late to turn back.
Yeah.
And that's almost the definition of the beginning of a thing.
And don't worry, folks, Matt has seen this movie.
I have seen. Oh yeah, we did a whole deep dive on Gore Verbinski, who is possibly my favorite director after having done that. And he directed The Ring, which many people don't know because when you think Pirates of the Caribbean, you don't usually think, oh yeah, The Ring.
But now you do.
Now you do.
Next, or last, actually, we have Bert Rogaine, who says, no one has mentioned Bob Clark's seminal 1974 horror masterpiece, Black Christmas. I am disappointed. Billy, what your mother and I must know is, where did you put the baby? You've certainly not seen Black Christmas, so I'm not even going to bother with that
Nope.
one.
I've never even heard of it.
I've seen Black Christmas. It was a long time ago. I think they remade that film pretty recent. Let me look this up. I feel like that's one. Yeah. Oh my God. There's a 2006 Black Christmas. There's a 2019 Black Christmas. Jeez.
That's pretty funny. A
Making this
movie I've
film a
never
lot.
heard of, been remade repeatedly. Okay. Whatever.
There's a lot of horror movies, Matt, and if you're not a fan of the genre, you're not going to know a lot about them, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Well, I'm not going to be the person that makes you watch all the horror movies. I'm just going to be the person that makes you watch half a dozen of them.
Yeah, just enough that I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm okay with this. We're not going to start a new horror podcast, but
no,
we can hit the highlights. That sounds good.
Let's make this clear because I feel like we've been joking about podcasts we've been planning on starting for a while now, and every time we do that, we get someone who takes that seriously. Like we're not doing the Lost podcast. Not yet, anyway. I'm not ready to give up on that one, but we did not officially announce that with last week's intro. We had some people question us on that.
Yeah,
no, it's not happening.
Yeah, the intro was then followed by me saying that I would rather slit my wrists than do that. That was the joke there. So,
but he was joking because he's gonna do it, right? The podcast, not the wrists part.
Not the wrist part, right? Yeah.
Okay. Good. So there you go. Officially announced Lost podcast, Flanagan podcast, horror podcast. What else we got on here?
I like that now we've left them totally unclear on which of these we are and are not serious about. So
none of them. We're not doing any of them.
We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything anymore. We're done. And that leads us into next week's question.
You guys can't see, but I'm winking at the microphone right now.
Yeah. Right. Whatever. It's fine. The next week's question. What is your favorite Stephen King novel? And please submit your answer in the form of a haiku or a benku. So,
Matt, remind everyone what the structure of a haiku is.
A haiku is 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. A benku is either 6, 6, 5, or whatever you want, as long as it I would say as long as it totals to 17 syllables.
Yeah. This is gonna be fun. I think this is gonna be really fun. So it's a simple, basic question: what's your favorite King novel? But we want you folks to write some haikus or benkus. Let be your own architect. Have some fun with it.
And you know what? Because because of the way the world is now, if you tweet these at us or some other platform these at us, then we will retweet them or share them or whatever the hell the thing is on that. I don't care. I'm too old for this shit.
Yeah.
But if you do send them, if you throw them at us digitally, then we'll broadcast them, and that'll be fun.
We will throw them as only we can. Yeah. Do we want to use a hashtag on this?
Yeah. Let's do hashtag Benku.
Benku. Okay, that's BENKU.
Or should it be something else? Should it be like so? I don't know, man. I think Benku is probably pretty unique. But
yeah, let me just search Twitter to see if hashtag Benku already
make sure it's not some horrible.
We're gonna milkshake duck this real quick.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not seeing a lot that I recognize on Benku, so fine, good.
There is like people using this though, and I think this is a Ben haiku. No.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, this is a Benku,
Oh my God.
but it's a guy named Ben, so I think he's just writing a haiku.
But okay.
No,
Well,
okay, this is a real haiku. It's just a guy named Ben who writes haikus and then hashtags himself as Benku.
sorry, Ben.
Yeah, we're
Your
about to steal
hashtag's
your
about
thunder.
hashtag's going to get real busy for a couple days and then go back to normal.
It's okay. This was tweeted in 2016, so I
Oh,
think we're good.
all right. All right.
So Benku, hashtag Benku, send them in. We will check that and retweet them. And I want to have some fun with this because this is one of those discussion question answers that is by design short. We usually can't like easily broadcast all your answers because they're usually paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs long. But this is one of the few ones that we can. So let's have some fun, folks. Come up with a haiku or a Benku and let us know what your favorite King book is in haiku format.
Yeah, and get creative.
Mm-hmm.
Describe the novel indirectly if you want. Whatever you want to do. It's all
just
good.
it's all up to you. Benku us.
Yeah.
That's it for us here on Kingslingers. Next week, as we said, it will continue with chapters 6 and 7. Chapter 6 is quite a doozy, so get ready for it. It's going to be a good episode.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com. Over on Twitter, of course, at kingslingerspod. That's probably where you should at those Benkus if you want to get them broadcasted most far and wide. And of course, over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia. Probably, generally speaking, that's the best place to do it. But I think this week I would actually prefer them on Twitter, frankly.
Yeah, I would too. If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. So you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that there are podcasts currently.
That's right. And if you like King Slingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to patron Flavored Owl. Welcome. And we hope you enjoy our discussion of the god-awful adaptation of Children of the Corn.
Jeez, Matt. Now they know what we thought of it without having to pay.
Spoiled it. Yeah. Sorry.
Of course, if you cannot afford to help support us, that is absolutely completely fine. There are tons of free ways to help us out. You can help share the podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends. As we said, we're still early in it, and this is still a great time for people to jump on board that have perhaps never listened to us before. This is a great book to do it. So please share it with them. You can also always help us out by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else reviews can be left. This week's spotlight review comes from Brandon S., who gives us 5 stars and says, "Wonderful palaver. The Shining made me a constant reader when I was 12. And I've read 40 plus Stephen King books since. And yet, I only began reading the Dark Tower series recently. Even though I'm almost to the end, I started listening to Kingslingers from the beginning anyway, because I just knew there were finer details and nuances that I had missed. Plus, the comprehensive reminders of what occurred in earlier volumes are providing helpful as I journey on. Scott and Matt are a perfect pair for me to get more out of this spectacular tale. Scott brings a welcoming expertise to the subject, and I relate to Matt's analytical curiosity and passion for literature. I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the Dark Tower discussions, while also following along with the current stuff. Next up is It, which I've read, then Desperation, which I have not. So now I have even more reason to, and I'm pretty sure these guys are Dallas-based like me, so hooray for that." Almost, Brandon. I am Dallas-based. Matt is he lives in Castle Rock.
I live in Castle Rock.
You don't actually live in Castle Rock anymore.
No, I don't.
It used to be cool.
I used to be.
There's a place called Castle Rock, Colorado that Matt used to live, but he doesn't live there anymore.
Now I live very, very close to it, but not close enough that Scott will just give me credit for it. He has to neg me like this every single time.
You chose to leave. It's your own fault. And true. I'm not going to feel bad about making you feel bad about that.
That's true, but I do frequently go into Castle Rock on errands, so I can at least say that I frequently visit Castle Rock. That's a thing.
Yeah, cool. That's great.
Well, anyway, thank you, Brandon S. Really happy to have you with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope you're listening along right now. And gosh, I hope we don't spoil any of the Dark Tower for you. I don't think we have spoiled any Dark Tower so far in it, but hope we don't do that at all. It might come up. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much again, and we will see you next week for more of Stephen King's It. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.